The story begins with a certain blonde girl named Ella being reborn in her body for the umpteenth time, because she has a very tragic fate, because of which she died, lying on the red floor every time she felt that her soul was leaving her body. But for her, it did not mean the end of everything, because the blonde was born again as a little girl with red, bright and rich eyes, with golden hair and charming cheeks, and she even looked at her appearance in the mirror with a smile. Suddenly, this tiny girl realized that she didn't need any family, and therefore she decided to act independently in her new life. Therefore she worked very hard to earn more, but she still couldn't escape her fate, because one day someone appeared in front of her, who she looked at with surprise. The thing is that several adults and a handsome aristocrat, more like a knight, appeared in front of the heroine, who kissed the little girl's hand and was already saying that she was the princess they had been looking for so long. An even greater shock for the little girl was that suddenly a father with the same golden hair and pale skin appeared in her life, who took Eli in his arms and was happy that his lost daughter called him Dad for the first time. And in honor of this, he would even make a national holiday, because he is a hero. Eli was surprised why her dad reacted to her so joyfully and enthusiastically for the first time. But there was a logical answer, because in fact all this was written in one novel, in which many pages tell about the life of the little girl, because she was born the main character in it. This is exactly how Ella's story goes. Or rather, it begins in an old wooden barn, where the emperor burst in and began looking for the one he needed, until one of his servants shouted out that he had found the princess. The two knights, like the golden-haired emperor, immediately bowed before the little girl and began to ask her about her health, because they had been looking for her all these years, and the fact that they found her safe and sound in an abandoned building was a miracle. The father immediately hugged his daughter as warmly and tightly as he could, which made the girl happy and made her think about whether it was worth it to run away from her parents earlier, who were actually waiting for her and protecting her, because she was a princess. And while the girl was crying, and her father was begging the girl to forgive her for not coming to her for so long, but both of them did not notice that there seemed to be someone in the boxes behind them, because they were swaying and muffled knocks were coming from there. The man in the box kept knocking, hoping that the sad and dramatic reunion of father and daughter would end and everyone would pay attention to her. But everything was far from that, because suddenly the emperor stood up and extended his hand to the knights, ordering them to guard his daughter forever. The stranger in the box clearly heard how the emperor with his daughter and guards were already heading out into the street and wanted to gallop away on horseback to the palace, leaving her here and not even suspecting that another person wanted help from them in this place. The thing is that in the box, like a kitten, there was the main character with her hands tied and her mouth covered with cloth, who could not scream, but beat her feet against the tree to be heard. But in the end, Salvation, in the form of an aristocrat, and his knights left. The pink-haired girl knew that she was born into this world as a secondary character, knowing full well that a connection with the main character, that is Elle, would not bring anything good, and therefore the lady decided to try to untie herself and get out on her own. However, earlier, in past lives, the little lady, walking through nature, already understood that she was born into the world as a noble, secondary character in a novella, and at first the girl was happy with her role because she had a rich family. But then everything was terrible, because the pink-haired girl one day suddenly saw mountains of books in front of her and realized that she needed to learn all of this because her Felicity family was doing everything for the country, and she, a girl named Rave, had to study more than anyone else and was a worthy heir. The whole point is that the girl's father was devoted to the imperial family with all his heart, and therefore forced his daughter to study well so that she could help the upper classes of the aristocracy. But when the lady sat at her desk, she would only lay her head on it from fatigue, while her father still forced her to study. The girl continued to sit at the table and live her life on it, while her worried father was next to her. But Rave was trying to understand why her family was so devoted to the emperor, if it was never mentioned in the plot of the novel. And the lady seemed to have found the answer to this question, because she imagined the emperor not only in luxurious snow-white clothing and on the throne, but also with a chic crown and a sly look. Realizing that the emperor was obsessed with his daughter and was a tyrant. His name is Liam Curtis, and he is such a cruel ruler that under his feet there were always dead people lying in huge pools of blood. But for him, this is not a seal or a nightmare, but just a way to show everyone power and outer fear. Even the heroine's father tries to flatter the emperor, ordering his daughter to also serve him without exception. But still, there was someone who dared to contradict the emperor, and it turned out to be the father of the main character with pink hair, who expressed his opinion about the proposal of the joyful emperor to give his daughter an entire country, because the duke calmly said that it was unreasonable when others stood behind him and were afraid to even speak. The girl immediately remembered her family's coat of arms, because she realized that it was her family that immediately found itself in the center of attention, and all because of one statement by the aristocrat Felicity, which the emperor probably did not like at all. As soon as the emperor heard such words, he immediately ordered the guards to point sharp spears at the entire family of the main Erinin, which is why the father had to protect not only his wife, but also his beloved daughter, because the tyrant emperor did not feel sorry for anyone except himself and his daughter. But what frightened and shocked everyone even more was that the emperor himself said that he suspected Felicity's family of treason, and therefore sentenced them to death, which made even the duke afraid. And only because of the cold decision of the emperor, the girl instantly lost her mother and father, tried to save herself from a terrible fire that broke out in her house, and in which her beloved parents died, losing their lives only because they dared to speak out against the fanatical emperor. When the girl was only 7 years old, when she was small and defenseless, she had to run with tears in her eyes, turning around with the hope that she would see her living parents. But this was never destined to happen again. As if sensing this, she continued to run, and not in vain, because the emperor's soldiers were already running after her, who wanted to get rid of the little girl in the same way, because this was the order of the supreme aristocrat, even if the girl was still small and innocent of anything. The girl already understood that her father should have worried more about his own family, and not about the emperor's family, and his approval in something, and at that time, the pink-haired lady realized with fright that 101 Knight grabbed her wrist and menacingly said the name Rave. They tried to convince the little lady that she could no longer run away, and the green-eyed lady cried and only wanted that, not yet realizing that her life would be completely opposite, not the same as she had previously imagined. Because suddenly, after some time, when she was captured and placed in the emperor's palace, placed at a table and shown many dishes on it, they solemnly announced that now she was being given a second chance to improve, and therefore she would serve the emperor's daughter, would be her personal taster. The girl thought that she was made a food taster for a reason, but so that she would be the first to try the princess's food and check for the presence of poison or deadly poison on herself. But before that she had to go through a lot of pain, which happened to her father, which is why she was in a dark basement. One knight with black hair looked at the main character and realized that in front of him was the very same daughter of the duke, and the lady next to him said that there could be no mistake, and they really caught the girl Rave, who was trying to escape. They looked at the angry and silent girl, who looked at them with her green eyes. They understood that in front of them was a criminal, the duke's daughter Felicity, and they were afraid to just let her go free. In order to intimidate her, the knight decided to tell the girl that if the emperor had mercy on her, she would most likely be sent to work in the mines, where life would be terrible, although it could also be that she would be left on the mountain of magical beasts, where there were flying monsters who wanted to feast on someone. And the knight and the woman continued to stand before the saddened and devastated girl, looking at her with mockery and saying that this is the best punishment for her, because her father is a criminal who cannot be forgiven. Only after the two adults left, the protagonist was left alone in the cold prison, sitting on the stone floor and thinking that the best option for her was the mines. but most likely the Emperor would choose a mountain with monsters for her. She screamed out of anger and injustice and was on the verge of tears, wondering out loud why everyone around her had decided to send a little girl to work in a mine as a slave. She had already imagined how her hands would forever remain tied with a steel chain, and in her wounded hand there would always be a pickaxe for working in dark caves, where there would not even be air, and the only joy for her would be a piece of bread. But as soon as she remembered the magical mountain where dead animals were constantly found, the little girl realized that the option with the monstrous mountain was no better, because even the Imperial Knights did not return from it alive. Rave sighed in despair and fatigue and grabbed her head, saying that she herself did not believe that children were treated so cruelly in this world. But she also had hope that there was another way out of the situation. But the lady immediately perked up when she recalled the novel, a book she had read before, which had never really described in detail what had happened to Felicity's house, which had fallen, and so perhaps everything was not so bad. And the lady also imagined that one day, if she could avoid the princess and the entire imperial family, from whom there was only trouble, she would be able to get not only a happy life, but also love, imagining a tall brunette next to her matured self. Then, inspired and standing on her feet, the girl looked at the moonlight penetrating through the small window in her cell and realized that not all was lost, and she would be able to beat fate and decide for herself how to live. She even clenched her fists and continued to look at the moonlight, as if it were her hope, gathering her determination so that the imperial family would no longer hinder her on the path to building a happy life. But as soon as the heroine left the dungeon on the Emperor's orders, all her plans immediately seemed to be shattered by a stone, because she, stunned, found herself on the table, holding a fork and knife in her hands, because now she had been made a taster, and in front of her stood a strict maid who looked at the little girl with folded hands and said that from now on she would be a taster personally for the princess, to try dishes and check them for poison before the Emperor's daughter tried the same food. Rave didn't even have words or the gift of speech, so she sold looking at the maid with a fork and spoon in her hands, as if now she didn't even have any hope of escaping from here. She wondered why it had come to this, imagining all the different desserts on the table and wondering how her difficulty lay only in tasting food that had originally been intended for the imperial family. The girl thought that many people might dream of such an easy job, especially under the Emperor. But for the girl it means that one day, if someone dares to poison the Emperor or her daughter, she will be the first to experience the poison and drop a glass of wine with poison, which only means inevitable death from poison. And from the first day, the heroine began working, so she sat at the table and tried one piece of each dish that the cook brought her, and it seemed that the heroine was disgusted, but she swallowed it anyway, because the evil maids were constantly watching her. As the girl was thinking about why she was destined to become a taster in this place, she couldn't help but notice how an inspired girl with golden hair appeared in the room, smiling and greeting everyone. As soon as the princess appeared in the room, all the servants paid attention to her and began to be touched, looking at her with the same warm smiles. Only the main character, who was still sitting at the table and working, did not seem to be so happy, but she still looked at the other little girl. All the maids immediately began to confess to the princess that they missed her, also giving the baby compliments and saying that they adored her, and one of them even lifted the girl into her arms with a smile, which made the red-eyed princess even happier. The servants also sweetly told the princess that the same girl whom the little girl had saved from execution days earlier was in the room with them, and Rave, hearing that the adults were talking specifically about her, became wary, and when the main character hoped that they would not pay attention to her and forget about her altogether, the princess with golden hair suddenly appeared right in front of her, and happily said that she remembered that she was the same girl who they wanted to execute. The pink-haired heroine was surprised by the fact that the princess in front of her did not seem to be evil to her, unlike her father, because she was only interested in whether the heroine tasted and liked the food she was trying. But the green-eyed lady only remained silent with surprise on her face. However, an even greater shock for the heroine was that the girl, whom it seemed she needed to avoid, extended her hand to her and happily said that she was looking forward to the time when she could play with her and just get to know her. And after a while, when the pink-haired lady was left alone with herself and fell on the bed, lying down only to rest, she grabbed her stomach because she had eaten too much, while wondering why everything happened to her. She continued to hold her stomach and think that she didn't like the imperial food, and she would never try it just like that, believing that even the stale and hard bread from the prison was tastier. However, she also thought about the good, remembering the princess and imagining her as a sweet angel with snow-white wings, because it was she who saved the heroine from death. Telling everyone that putting children in prison, and especially killing them, is very cruel. The girl was surprised, realizing that she would never have thought that one phrase of a little girl could save her. And with thought, the girl decided to open the window of her room and look at the blossoming tree, remembering that she would have a lot of time to prepare because it was still a long way off before Eli and Rave grew up. She also knew that even though she had read the novel, she didn't know exactly what would happen to her, and so now, touching the wall, she knew that she needed to prepare a plan and escape during her growing up years. But she wanted to leave this house, even now. And the lady looked at the snow-white flowers under the house, realizing that she should also survive in this castle as long as possible. But at that very moment, it seemed, one idea woke up in her head. She looked calmly at the same flowers and thought out loud that she also needed to wisely avoid poisons when eating food, not to get poisoned and not to die, especially at such a young age. But when the lady looked even more closely at the flowers, which were actually strewn all over the clearing and therefore decorated the garden, the lady realized that it was precisely these plants that could help her with this, because she knew that in the story, according to the plot, the princess was poisoned and one flower helped her. She imagined a cute and small purple flower with several leaves and realized that it, having the name Rapier, could help her survive and recover, if the princess managed to avoid death with its help. She turned to the room with enthusiasm and began to walk, clenching her hand into a fist and telling herself that although this flower was very rare, she was sure that she would be able to find it among the many exotic plants in the garden, because she already remembered its name and what exactly it looked like. The joyful lady realized that she had to find out as soon as possible, and that made her smile, getting ready to quickly carry out her plan and save her own destiny. But when the lady left to take at least the first step in order to get the desired flower, a servant appeared before her after a while and asked with displeasure why she suddenly needed an encyclopedia of botany. And the servant turned out to be a man who looked more like a librarian, who held the book in his hand with displeasure and sternly told the florid-haired heroine that traitors were not allowed to touch the property of the empire, and especially its things. And while the girl was still trying to explain to the man that she only wanted a book about botany, and the aristocrat answered that he couldn't trust such a thing to a traitor who could then create some kind of poison, they were overheard by the one who suddenly threw a thick book in his face, not allowing him to insult the child any further. When the heroine screamed in fear and shuddered, another aristoata approached her, waving his hand and looking with displeasure at the guy lying on the floor, yelling that he shouldn't talk anymore because he has a nasty voice. The guy who fell to the floor was shaking and trying to get up. The pink-haired lady turned around in shock and looked at the one who decided to attract attention to himself in such an unexpected way, and he succeeded. And in front of her, the girl noticed with defeat a blonde with unusual and magical purple eyes, who was looking at the little girl and also continued to talk to the ill-mannered guy, saying that if he wanted to yell at someone so much, let him go outside. The pink-haired lady was no less surprised by the appearance of such a noble person. She even opened her mouth in shock, because she knew that in front of her was, apparently, the same Duke Vichel, whom she knew from the novel. Continuing to look at the unique appearance of the aristocrat, who was both handsome and refined, the lady remembered that his name was Cassius, and that he, according to the plot, was also the sworn enemy of her deceased family, Felicity. She also remembered the old yellow map with bloodstains and pictures of mountains, because the Duke in front of her was like a tame dog of the imperial family and a ruthless demon of war, a person cruel to others. According to the plot of the novel, which the girl managed to get into, Duke Cassius will gain great fame, and many began to fear him. In the original story, he was the main puppeteer who controlled everyone in the shadows, not afraid to stain his hands with blood. The pink-haired lady was very scared of him, realizing that he definitely did not feel anger towards children and already treated her as mercilessly as he did others. But suddenly, the Duke simply lifted the baby up and looked at her intently, forcing her to shut up. And while the little girl, shocked by such an incident, was silent and looked at the aristocrat with large green eyes, Cassius shook her and said that he seemed sure that everything was all right with her and that she was not very scared of the ill-mannered guy. At the moment when the little girl was thinking about what had just happened and what exactly the man had said to her, the Duke himself noticed that the guy, who had previously fallen to the floor with a bang because of the book, was displeasedly trying to get up, asking Cassius what he was allowing himself to do. The aristocrat continued to tell the Duke that even if he was a nobleman, he had no right to behave like that with others. But in response, the blonde only looked at him menacingly and asked why, in that case, he was offending such a defenseless person as this little girl. Only after that did the guy get up from the floor and run away in fear, not intending to mess with the Duke and the baby anymore. And Cassius himself put the protagonist on the floor, who was still worried about the botanical encyclopedia, not understanding how to get it. When the kind aristocrat in front of her knelt down, obviously to say something, the pink-haired little girl worried, thinking that she would most likely have to steal the book. But then she thought of kind Cassius.
She decided to take a risk and ask the stranger to give her, or at least lend her a book. And when the Duke, to the lady's amazement, immediately agreed, she looked at him and said that she wanted a book about botany, because she was the princess's personal taster and she needed to know everything about medicinal plants.
And as soon as the heroine told this, it struck Cassius so much that he looked at her with big eyes and seemed not to believe that in front of him was not just a little girl, but a lady who, at her young age, was already interested in knowledge and botany. But he still did not dare to upset the heroine, who so wanted to learn something new. So he said that soon his knight would bring her the book she needed, and this made the pink-haired lady so happy that she grabbed her face, covering her mouth. If she had wings, she would have definitely flown away from happiness. But instead, she jumped in front of the Duke and thanked him in a sweet voice for the favour, and she also talked about her room, saying that it was in the princess's palace.
The Duke could not take his eyes off the charming lady, who was smiling, and because of whom everything around seemed to be brighter. And while she was saying that she would definitely thank him for his help, he was looking at her unusual pink hair.
After this, the little girl left, not forgetting to turn to the aristocrat and bow to him in farewell. And while Cassius looked at her for the last time, he was already calling the servants to him. A brown-haired guy quickly appeared in front of him, whom the aristocrat asked how his investigation was progressing, and then replied that, as expected, there was a traitor among the members of Felicity's family. He also recalled a girl who had been with another knight in the dungeon with the heroine, telling Cassius that the princess had boarded a ship going to Postorimo, which was probably why she had been unable to contact the knights. The Duke folded his arms and said that this meant that it would not be so easy to get the princess back. But then he also remembered that the Emperor's second order for mobilization had recently been carried out. The fact is that 2 months ago, when he was in a spacious place with a rich sunset, where there were also only crows wanting to eat, he and his army were advancing towards the city of Postorimo, an important strategic object. But suddenly the Duke received a letter from Duke Felicity himself, which said that the ruler wanted to make him a personal support for his daughter to take care of her, and the warrior aristocrat read all this with shock on his face. And now when not only he, but also his servant can be seen in the window. He tells the servants that he was never able to come to the Duke, because the main character's father died tragically, leaving behind a daughter whom Cassius now needs to protect. And so, the day passed when the heroine managed to agree with the Duke about the book, and the next, clear day, when everyone wanted to enjoy the warmth and sun as soon as possible. Princess Eli was already riding a snow-white horse and having fun, and the maids behind her were shouting at the little girl to be careful. And the main character also sat on a table in the garden and worked, trying a small piece of each dish for the presence of poison or toxin, although she remembered that she had managed to meet with the servant of Duke Cassius, who gave her a botanical encyclopedia. But that same evening, when the little girl in white pajamas wanted to read at least the first pages of the encyclopedia, one maid rushed to her, waved her hand, and ordered the little girl to get ready, because she did not have an hour of rest from her work as a taster.
Now the girl is in a luxurious garden, but everyone demands that she only do her work, and she tries to try everything that is given to her without letting go of her fork, and sometimes leaving her plate empty.
The pink-haired lady was dissatisfied, and sometimes looked angrily at the blonde riding a horse, asking herself when this would stop. But the Emperor's princess seemed to be having so much fun that she was not going to stop riding. And the princess herself was definitely not that evil, because she only looked at the heroine sweetly and sometimes winked at her as if she already considered her a good acquaintance or friend. But this did not lift Rave's mood, and when the maids around admired the golden-haired baby, told each other that she had just winked at them, and they were even able to film it on a magic stone, the proagnoite, with an empty expression on her face, held a fork and simply hoped that it would all end soon. But all of Rave's prayers were in vain, because suddenly she noticed next to the princess, who was riding a white horse, a certain knight on a dark horse, who was smiling at the Emperor's daughter and telling her something enthusiastically, and the heroine recognized someone in him. And in this guy, the girl recognized a knight named Cain, who was very cheerful on horseback, and told the princess that there was no one better who could ride a horse as professionally as he did. But looking at the appearance of the arrogant aristocrat, the lady realized that it was he who was in the front row when his family was attacked and called traitors. Out of anger, the main character even stuck a fork into the dessert, thinking that she hopes that God will definitely punish him, because he is not only a faithful man to the princess, and fulfills all her demands, but also fulfills even the most terrible demands of the imperial family. But she did not expect at all that the lady's wish would come true at that very second, because when she turned around, she noticed that Cain had fallen from his horse, while his animal seemed to be kicking and being capricious, and the princess on a white horse was already riding towards him to help. The golden-haired girl immediately got off her horse and fell to her knees, and began to anxiously ask Cain if everything was okay with him. But he, with blood on his face, only smiled and said that he was very pleased that the princess was personally worried about him. And while Eli was worried about Cain's condition, and her boyfriend answered that he wouldn't mind even dying for her right now, and the lady was delighted, she spent her time very nicely and cheerfully, realizing that all this didn't concern her, and her job was only to eat delicacies. After some time, the lady, when the sky was already coloured by the sunset, walked along a bright path past bushes and trees with a book in her hands, realizing that she had not had free time for a long time. But thanks to this very knight who fell from his horse, everything changed, and she was forgotten for a while, sitting down under a thick tree trunk to enjoy not only the shade of the tree, the calm nature, but also the book she was going to study. The pink-haired girl had already opened the book and began to read it diligently. She immediately began to search in the book for the name of the flower that she needed, which could save her life and cure her from poison or toxin. And she managed to do what she had planned, because she found information in the encyclopedia about a plant called Rapura. Having started reading about how the 6 petals that exude a sweet aroma and are found near the Manishi trees, have incredible properties. The girl reads the encyclopedia even more attentively, sitting under the tree. After that, she decided to look at the treetops, realizing that she had a good chance of finding this flower here, in the Emperor's garden, because there are many pests on the Manishi trees, and therefore such trees are rarely kept in gardens. But she also remembered that most likely this flower is in the mysterious dead forest, which is located right next to the large and snow-white imperial palace, which surprised the girl, who did not understand why such a scary place was located next to the Emperor's house. And this did not stop the main character, because she threw the book down and raised her hands up, telling herself that this was not a problem for her, and she was ready to give it her all, even ready to go into this forest and get the healing flower she needed. But she didn't expect at all that when she was sincerely happy about her beginnings and motivation, she would notice next to her a strange, red-eyed boy who was looking at her, which Lei was silently amazed by. She immediately stopped saying anything, or even moving, looking at the boy with both curiosity and shock, which caused a silent awkwardness between them, since the boy did not dare to speak first. The girl was even more amazed at the moment when she realized that it seemed like this boy had been here all the time and had been looking at her all this time, and the pink-haired girl, not noticing this, had been acting as if no one was there. But when she took a closer look at the red-eyed guy who was staring at her and even made her scared, Rave wondered why he was here and who he was anyway, if he looked so scary and acted so strangely. Looking at him more closely, the heroine realized that she was seeing a boy with red eyes, which only members of the imperial family have, and this stranger also had an ideal appearance. But when the lady realized that she had never seen him in the novel, she thought about it, wondering if Eli was the only child in the family.
And the first to introduce herself was the main character, who came closer to the boy and asked what his name was, while bending down and greeting him.
But when he didn't answer her a word, the pink-haired heroine looked at the boy in surprise and realized that he was quite silent and secretive. Although he wasn't afraid of her, if he didn't run away, the heroine also heard a strange sound, as if she had stepped on something when she took a step. The first thing the main character noticed was that right under her feet there was a strange mound of stones with a wooden cross, very similar to a homemade grave, as if someone had recently been buried here. Looking down, the girl saw not only her legs and cute little shoes, but also that the lady had actually crushed a bouquet of daisies with her foot, and next to it, it seemed, was the same large pile of stones. The heroine immediately felt awkward, and she told the guy that she would now bring new flowers for him. But when he was silent, and in Rave's soul there was curiosity, she still extended her hand to the grave and asked the guy if she could inquire who was buried there. To this the boy responded by turning away from the heroine and said discontentedly that even if he said something, nothing would change after that. Then the pink-haired girl sat down next to him and simply said that she wanted to apologize properly, in her heart rejoicing that the stranger had finally spoken. And when the guy said that this was his parents' grave, the girl was so amazed that she fell silent again, not even trying to say anything to her interlocutor, because his answer made her think immediately. Noticing also that the stranger in front of her was simply sitting under a tree and not looking at her, the lady assumed that this boy did not get along with his parents, and that was why he became so cold. At that moment, the girl remembered her life, or rather the moment when she was captured by the guards and ordered to follow them, realizing that they had a similar fate, and often, like small and defenseless children, they could not resist something. When the pink hair of the main character became even brighter due to the rays of the sunset, and the warm wind played with it, she realized that now it was as if her reflection was sitting next to her. Only it was a boy who also experienced a terrible fate. But he still looked at her when he noticed that the girl knelt down in front of his parents' grave and sincerely apologized, as if to them, for disturbing their peace. But the guy was even more surprised when suddenly the protagonist turned to him and grabbed his hand with joy, saying that now was the time to get acquainted. But the stranger did not expect this so much that he looked at her with wide eyes. The joyful girl said that she shared her smile and strength with him, and therefore wished that his next day would be pleasant and cheerful. all the troubles would go away, and the saddest memories would leave his memory. And she convinced the boy that she was never wrong about this. The guy got a little angry, asking the heroine why she was so happy, and she in turn just picked up the encyclopedia and turned around, getting ready to leave, smiling at the stranger and saying that everything was not so good yet, but she already knew that she would be happy. To cheer up the stranger, the girl decided not to leave yet, but to open the book and show him the spread with information about the same flower that she needed, telling him that this plant is called rapier. But the boy remained silent. The girl told him everything she knew about the flower and also asked the guy if he would help her find it. And when the lady was already running away, thanking him for his help, the red-eyed boy only told her that he hadn't even said anything, and the heroine had already asked him to notify her about the flower if she saw it. And such a meeting with the girl made the boy think and look at his own hand with inspired red eyes, wondering why that stranger was so confident in herself and said that she never made mistakes in her words. And so the strange evening passed, when the guy thought that he would be able to silently enjoy the rich sunset and visit his parents' grave. But he was lucky enough to meet a pink-haired lady who lifted his spirits. Several days have passed since that moment when Rave managed to meet the stranger and meet him under the tree. And now, when the garden still remains a wonderful place for walks, the story continues. And Elle didn't want to sit still, because she was already running through this garden to her dad, and not empty-handed, but with a cake that didn't look very appetizing, because the chocolate was melting, and the drops on the cake were dripping back, but everyone understood that it was the happy Elle who made it. Elle said that since today was Thanksgiving Day, she wanted to give everyone this cake, and this surprised the golden-haired emperor so much that he froze in place and looked at his daughter, with his mouth slightly open, and all the servants behind him did the same. But then he finally understood his daughter's intentions, and therefore stroked her head, saying that it was a wonderful gift, smilingly asking the lady if she had made it herself, to which Eli replied that it was true, although her cake had turned out poorly. And while the father kissed his daughter, telling her that this was the best gift he had ever seen, and he couldn't wait to try it, behind him the main character could be seen, who was once again sitting on a table in the garden and doing a tasting. The thing is that when the girl looked at the table and should have already been doing her work, trying each dish, she was clearly worried, not understanding why she could not find that very flower. She remembers that sometimes she would go outside in the dark and walk around the garden, look at the tree branches, and realize that during all this time, she still had not managed to find a flower, even though she looked very well. Rave even thought about asking that same boy she saw under the tree, but when she came to that place, she didn't notice anyone and only looked at the lonely grave, with the thought that perhaps she'd been too rude to him. And now, when the heroine is even more worried and remembering all this, she wondered why she was never able to notice even one flower in the dead forest and what she should do now. No one even asked the girl about her health and mood, because in fact she had not slept for several days, and that was why she hung her head down. And at that time, a maid came up to her and put a new dish on the table, and she herself paid attention only to the imperial family. And she seemed to feel very unwell, while the servants around her talked about how the aristocrat's mood had improved, and that it was a real relief. And now, after every visit from the Duke of Vishelleberry, they had to ask for an audience with the princess. The girl looked at the same maids who were gossiping next to her, and it turns out they were talking about how something seemed to have happened in Posterimo, and they had even heard that some kind of skirmish had occurred during the meeting. She immediately recalled that very meeting with one knight, realizing that it was precisely because of this meeting that he could have problems, because she not only received the book, but also gave him some secret item. She also looked at the emperor and princess, the happy father and daughter, who were sitting on red chairs and having a good time, and the lonely Rave at that time thought that she didn't want to take revenge on anyone. But she would also never be able to forgive the imperial family for the pain. And suddenly, when the lady heard in her head someone else's words about how the emperor would not allow someone an easy death, blood unexpectedly flowed from her face and fell in large drops onto the plate and the tablecloth. The main character looked at her palm with defeat, examined the blood on her fingers, and realized that blood was flowing from her mouth, and her condition was getting worse and worse each time. It was getting dark before her eyes. When all those present, including the aristocrats, maids, and servants, belatedly noticed how the girl fell on the grass and no longer moved, and under her the grass was turning red, the pink-haired lady was losing consciousness more and more and did not hear anything else. The girl realized that if she had found that very flower, she would not have had such big problems, and she would not have been poisoned so suddenly. So she mysteriously imagined that very red-eyed boy who was holding a bouquet of purple flowers in his hands. It seemed that this flower looked quite ordinary, and like all the others, it was small in size, and even its root system was small. But it could have helped the main character so much that now she would not have suffered, losing consciousness and feeling the iron smell of blood. When the lady hoped that she would not die, the Emperor approached her and lifted her head, calling her by name. But for the main character, everything seemed to echo, and she could not even clearly unsee the silhouette of the blonde man in front of her. At that very moment, when the girl was about to lose consciousness, she seemed to find herself in a dark room with snow-white flowers and a golden mirror, and the kind voice of her deceased father told her that she should always restrain negative emotions. Let them go and forget them. And even when little Rave asked her dad before bed what she should do if something incredibly terrible happened one day, her dad just put his hand on the top of her head and said that she should just smile and move on to live. At that time, the girl did not understand why her father told her such difficult words, but when a terrible fire occurred that completely engulfed the entire palace of her native family, Rave suddenly realized that her father meant that she simply needed to survive. She remembers how she found herself among the strict knights of the Emperor and understood that now they would take her with them, and the little girl with pink hair realized that her dad only wanted his only daughter to forget about everything and live happily. She thought that if only her memory had returned, and if only she had escaped with everyone else, everything would have been different, and at that moment she imagined an angel who was glowing with a kind light and was on a horse so that she could not see his face or understand who it was. Then the girl fell to the ground and burst into tears, sobbing so hard that it seemed like everyone could hear her pain. And the heroine also realized that she was not sure that she could forget everything and forgive everyone, as her father had told her. But when everything around her seemed lost and empty, a glowing green butterfly appeared, circling above the Emperor's palace and flying closer to him, looking like the only hope for something bright. She was able not only to fly closer to the palace, but also to fly into one dark room through an open window, illuminating everything in her path. And the magical insect chose not an ordinary room, but the main character's bedroom. The fact is that the heroine even dreamed of purple flowers, which were carefully collected in a bouquet and were in a vase that stood near her bed, which in fact were brought to her by one red-eyed boy who was more excited about her condition than anyone else. A week passed from the moment the girl lost consciousness, and one day the girl finally woke up and held a white cup of water in her hands, with a stunned face, realizing that he thought he was already going to die because she even dreamed of some kind of magic. But before the girl had time to come to her senses, Duke Cassius's assistant appeared sitting in front of her, and he was already asking the protagonist where she had managed to get the important information that she had previously given to his master in exchange for the encyclopedia. The fact is that the very same pieces of paper that the main character gave to Duke Cassius were letters between the late Emperor and the previous Duke of Viscelaberry, which turned out to be incredibly valuable and important. And, as the little girl had told Duke Cassius earlier, these letters were hidden among the personal belongings of the previous ruler, for example, in a dark box with beautiful patterns which did not seem to hide anything amazing. The girl understood that they wanted to ask her more about something, because thanks to her help they had already been able to reclaim the lands previously captured by the Emperor. But then the girl sheepishly put the cup on the nightstand, saying that in general she didn't know anything more. After this, the knight left to say goodbye to the heroine, and the lady was left alone, lying on the bed and thinking that her life could depend even on such an insignificant item as a flower. And she also thinks that she is not alone in trusting the imperial family if she helped her now. And when she decided to rise, looking at that very bouquet of magical flowers, she thought that this survival for her should be above all else. And now she just needed to concentrate. She decided to carefully get out of bed and look at the flowers closer, realizing that it was a rapier, the flowers that she had been looking for earlier, and she realized that it looked like that boy with red eyes had brought them to her. Remembering that the boy had come to her after all, and that it had not been a dream, the pink-haired girl leaned closer to the flowers and realized that she was even more indebted to that stranger, because she did not even understand how he had managed to get so many rare flowers. After that, she decided to sit down on the bed and picked up the sheets of paper for work, thinking that she absolutely had to meet that boy, but for this they needed to at least get to know each other better, so that later she could thank him. The girl thought that if she wrote a message on a piece of paper, especially for him, then the red-eyed boy would definitely come to her, and so she was already looking at him with a smile, hoping that this would help her meet the stranger. But when Rave was already running around the room and thinking that she needed to quickly put the same piece of paper on the grave of the boy's parent so that the stranger would find her message, a golden-haired princess unexpectedly came into her room, greeting the heroine with a basket in her hands. In front of the astonished girl, there appeared a cheerful, red-eyed princess in a blue dress, who looked at her with a smile and asked how she was feeling, asking if anything was hurting her. The protagonist immediately wondered what the princess was doing there, so she looked at her with genuine shock, while the princess continued to ask her if she had a fever and if she could get out of bed yet. The lady was even more surprised when the princess suddenly apologized to her for everything, admitting that she would never have forced her to take up such a dangerous profession. But the embarrassed and frightened Rave only said with a feigned smile that it was her job, and when the girl wondered why the princess was behaving with her as if she had known her for a long time, the golden-haired lady took her hand and with a smile offered to become her personal maid of honor, that is, someone who would accompany her everywhere, provide moral support, help her dress and do her hair. The girl immediately imagined in her head a stern and yellow emperor who would order others to execute her for the slightest reason if she made a mistake in her work as a maid of honor. But now the princess insists in front of her, wants Rave to be her maid of honor. But also, when the servants and guards appeared behind the princesses, she answered the main character with a smile. But she could not answer her right now, and the embarrassed pink-haired lady answered saying that she thanked her for her care. The heroine was surprised that today they talked a lot and seemed to be friends. But suddenly their conversation was interrupted by someone adult who extended his hands to the princess and said, "He apologizes, but it is not time for talking." And the blonde looked at the servant and was silent. The servant also informed the princess that the knights who had gone to exterminate the magical beasts had finally returned, and the red-eyed lady immediately remembered a certain Sir Carlson, and the protagonist was silent, although, in her mind, she was only glad that the princess was no longer talking to her. But when the girl was already hoping that the princess would leave now, and they were even saying goodbye, the princess suddenly told the girl that the flowers on the nightstand were incredibly beautiful, which caused a chill to run through the pink-haired girl's body. The golden-haired lady immediately approached the flowers closer and began to ask the Gurnia where she got them. And the protagonist excitedly answered that she had collected them nearby, although this was a lie, and in fact, she did not want the princess to touch them. Princess Eli seemed not to hear the girl and kept touching the flowers, although they belonged to the main character, and Rave was even more amazed by the fact that the red-eyed lady had just turned to her, confessed that she really liked purple flowers, and therefore asked the heroine if she could take them all for herself. The girl had to shyly tell the lady that she could of course take them for herself, angrily and disappointedly imagining how she was falling into the abyss, because for a second the lady thought that everything had become good, but suddenly everything became bad again, and after several days had passed since the main character's meeting with the princess and her recovery. But even after such a long time, she looked at her own vase and realized that the aristocrat had decided to take all the flowers for herself, leaving only one. That's why the pink-haired lady looked at the empty vase and understood that she had been too early to rejoice in her victories and motivation, because as it turned out, all plans could be ruined by some princess with sudden desires, and the girl, of course, could not refuse her. The girl sadly took the last flower in her hands, remembering that the princess had not only taken a bouquet for herself earlier, but also secretly came to the Jaranina's room to take the remaining flowers, because she was used to getting all the best easily, and now Rave was afraid that he would take the last flower for himself. The girl realized that she needed to act, not wait, and then she decided to leave the palace and go to the grave to see if the boy had received her note. But as soon as she went out into the corridor, she noticed worried nurses and what looked like wounded warriors on the floor. She looked at one blonde guy, who was lying and breathing heavily, while the others were saying that he only had 3 hours to live if a magician or priest did not come to them, because they had previously given him first aid, but it was too late. The pink-haired lady continued to look at everything through the half-open door, realizing that the soldiers received such injuries because of the magical beasts that were being exterminated. But if she wanted to go outside, she needed to go through this corridor, because there was no other way. The nurses told the other servants that they could not help the victims in any way, especially at a time when they were only receiving more victims, and the heroine behind the door was already about to enter the corridor. She decided to quietly approach the injured blonde man when the nurses were talking to others about how this warrior had been wounded by a monster right in the leg, which was causing his body to gradually turn blue and darken. Taking a closer look at the warrior's body, which was turning bluer with each passing minute, the girl realized that the poison that had entered his body would soon reach his heart, and only that very flower that she had previously saved for herself could help him survive. At that moment, the girl imagined herself at the table, and as if she were not alive, realizing that she herself never again wants to get into a situation where her life could depend on some of the emperor's food, so she admits that she doesn't even want to give up the flower. The thing is that the lady had been carrying the last flower with her in case she needed to use it and save her life. But now, realizing that the flower would wither in 2 days anyway, she still gave the flower petals to the blonde, which caused him to barely open his eye. She calmly showed the petals to the warrior and said that if he ate them, the poison would stop working in his body, and she also asked him to open his mouth, and the blonde just listened to the girl and remained silent, realizing that this was his last hope for salvation. And after the guy barely survived the petals and swallowed them, he felt a small palm on his forehead, and it was the hand of the main character, who said that this flower was incredibly expensive. So she wanted the warrior to repay her later, because just now she seemed to have given him her life. After that, Rave calmly stood up and decided to leave the room, opening the door slightly and telling the warrior at last that she hoped that he would survive, not even noticing that the astonished knight turned his head towards her. His eyes opened slightly, but they were still tired and already seemed lifeless. But he still looked at the departing Rave as if trying to remember her appearance, even if the saviour did not even introduce herself to him. After that, when it became dark in the heroine's room, the girl locked herself in the bedroom and simply fell to the floor from fatigue. But she knew that she still needed to get into the forest and come to the boy's grave, or find him himself. But even after 6 hours of walking through the forest, the girl realized that she did not see anyone near the grave, although her note was not there, which only meant that the boy took it for himself. And when the girl was already thinking about how she would rest today, she herself did not notice how, it seemed, someone was approaching her window, because the lady's balcony was wide enough, and one could easily get through it into her room. The girl was lying on the bed and hugging her pillow, upset that she couldn't do anything. But suddenly her large and high windows opened, and this stranger turned out to be the same red-eyed boy, and as soon as the heroine heard this, she was immediately amazed. The black-haired guy looked at her as if he had clearly come here on business and was about to say something. But the protagonist at that time turned around in shock and looked at the arriving guest in such a way that it was he who she least expected to see here. But as soon as the heroine began to rejoice and smile at the sudden arrival of the guy, telling him that she was already sure that he would not come to her, the black-haired guy not only approached her, but also hit the wall next to her head with his hand, holding a piece of paper in it and ordering the girl to answer his question honestly. He leaned forward and sternly asked her what secret the girl knew about him, and Rave seemed speechless, looking at the familiar fry, with his mouth slightly open and his eyes wide. The boy insisted on his own and continued to look at the lady with his red, bright eyes, repeating once again what secret the girl had learned about him, because it bothered him so much that he was ready, as now, to break into the lady's room and start questioning her. But the boy's arrival made Rave so happy that she wasn't even afraid of his appearance, looking at him with a sweet smile and pink cheeks, telling him with glowing green eyes that she was incredibly glad that he came to her. As it turned out, in the letter she left on the boy's grave, she not only thanked the boy for his help, but also hinted that she knew a secret of his that she would tell if he came to her. And now, when the stunned guy looks at the lady, he seems to understand that the girl simply deceived him so that he would come faster. When the window was open and it let the enchanting moonlight into the heroine's bedroom, Rave confessed that she wrote about the secret in the letter for the reason that she rather desired his arrival and therefore really deceived him, for which she asks forgiveness. Even when the guy was finally disappointed and wanted to leave the girl's bedroom, the pink-haired lady still did not let him go and hugged him, begging him not to leave with a smile, and the red-eyed guy only told the lady to leave him alone. The girl said that if the guy listened to her, she would let him go, to which the guy replied that the girl was very impudent, but Rev still did not let him go and hugged him, saying that everything was so, and she would still get her way. He stopped only at the moment when the girl sincerely thanked him for the help that allowed her to recover and get back on her feet, and the stranger remained silent, looking at Rave with his thoughts. What surprised him even more was that the girl with the sweet face and pink eyes admitted that she considered him her savior, which the girl said with pink cheeks, and the brunette fell silent, looking at her with a bewilderment. He stopped and remained silent when the pink-haired lady gestured with her hand and said that she really wanted to thank him personally, and also wanted to ask him about something, and then the guy finally listened to her without looking away. As it turned out, the heroine wanted to ask the guy where exactly he got such rare and valuable flowers, and when the guy said that if she let him go, he would show her the plants, but the girl only grabbed his hand tighter and said that she was sure that he would run away. He had no choice but to simply put up with the persistent girl and simply walk hand in hand with her, because the pink-haired lady walked cheerfully towards the light, leading the silent gentleman with red eyes behind her. The young guy walked silently through the dark forest and held the hand of the main character, who was already impatient to see at least one flower that was precious to her, and pick it, and she hoped for the best, because it was this stranger who was able to get a whole bouquet for her. And after a light walk through the night garden, the black-haired guy stopped and pointed to a new place, saying that they had come to the designated clearing, and the heroine at that time bent down and spoke with difficulty that she needed time to catch her breath. But after the girl was able to come to her senses after her quick steps and walk forward a little, where the little gentleman had shown her, she was silently amazed, because she realized that she was seeing a real miracle in front of her.
The thing is that she saw not 1, not 10, or even 50 flowers, but a whole meadow with them, which looked incredibly magical and enchanting, and the heroine didn't even believe it.
She was incredibly amazed and realized that the guy had shown her a real paradise of rapier flowers, and in gratitude she decided to hug him tightly and pounce on him, confessing that he had just become her personal guardian angel. But the guy seemed only puzzled by this. Finally, he was amazed when the girl put her hands on his shoulder and said with a smile that he was the only one in her circle who saved her out of kindness, not for profit, and that she incredibly appreciated that, and therefore she also wanted to become his guardian angel. And he listened with amazed eyes to the words from the little girl, that now it would be she who would come to him in that very place, near the grave, and she sincerely hoped that then the guy would finally tell her his name. And the boy was shocked not only because of the words, but also because of the sweet touches of the lady. He was surprised that the girl addressed him as an emperor, and therefore logically, and surprisedly, asked how the lady knew about his status. And then the girl only laughed. Goya. So he also knows that she is from Felicity's family, and therefore she also knows a little more about him. The girl promised the guy that she would share with him all the necessary information, and after that they parted, and a whole week had already passed since that meeting, and the girl during this time had managed to return to her work. So she sat at the table and ate food, not understanding why it was so noisy in the house today. The girl realized that it seemed that a reward had arrived for those villagers who had recently hunted magical beasts, and the girl immediately remembered that very warrior who was dying and whom she had saved with a flower, sadly hoping that he was okay. But she was encouraged by the fact that the decision to give him the last flower turned out to be the right one in the end, and so she ate the food with a smile, realizing that she had found herself a whole meadow of flowers, and now, just in case, she eats one in the morning and takes several plants with her. But when the girl was already thinking that she didn't need to worry about possible death from poison that could be slipped into her food, the girl realized that the princess suddenly burst into the room and shouted the heroine's name, as if she already wanted to ask her about something, and this greatly angered and upset Rave. When she turned to the golden-haired princess, she was already actively gesturing with her hand and asking the little girl about where she had been all this time, which made the lady wonder why the princess was talking to her like that. The princess even smiled, and somewhat unethically told Rave that she had gained weight during the week, and this embarrassed the protagonist, who shyly told the aristocrat that she was glad to see her, although she felt awkward around her. Also, a smiling maid approached Princess Elle and told the heroine to sit down to eat quickly. But the golden-haired girl did not even lag behind the angry Rave, saying that she would sit down to eat only after she talked to her friend. But this angered the protagonist even more. The golden-haired girl noticed that Rave continued to sit at the table and simply eat food, which is why she asked if the heroine was refusing her offer to become her personal maid of honor. And at first, she just looked at her, thinking that she would never want to be friends with a princess like Elle. That's why she decided to look at the princess with red eyes and confess to her that she liked her current job, because she loved protecting her from poisons and poisons, which surprised Elle, although in fact the protanoid was lying, not wanting to spend time with the aristocrat. The protagonist even looked at her with pity and said that this was her only sincere desire, and therefore she asked the princess to listen to her and not make her a maid of honor, and this touched the princess. The red-eyed girl looked at her with no less charm and sweet eyes, saying that in that case they should definitely become friends, which sounded a little strange from the princess. The maid immediately approached the princess and explained to her that Rave Lady was from the family that betrayed the emperor, and therefore should no longer be friends with her. But the golden-haired girl seemed to be the kindest, burning that this same girl was protecting her by tasting food for poison. The red-haired lady could only watch in surprise as the maid remained silent and pondered the princess's opinion, realizing that her attempts to be as far away from Elle as possible had led to the princess still not leaving her alone, and even offering to become friends. She became even more worried and seemed to pray to God to hear her prayers, so that everyone would leave her alone and everything would be as before. But to her regret, the maid eventually agreed with the princess, and even said that she thought that the emperor would not be against their friendship, and the maid fell silent when the two cute girls began to hug. Or rather, only Elle hugged Rave and said that now they were real friends, and this only frightened the protagonist, who from shock looked very much like a pale ghost. The lady wondered how much longer she would have to suffer, and while the main character's affairs seemed to be only getting worse, in a certain castle that looked old and overgrown, which is called Koaru and is located next to the imperial palace, Rave's friend lives. This partner turned out to be a red-eyed guy who liked to look at the window and think about something of his own while sitting on the windowsill, and in fact He was thinking about the mysterious and kind main character, who did not leave his memory. Her sweet image still did not disappear before his eyes, and it seemed that at that moment not only did a little-known but kind lady smile at him, but the whole world became brighter and more pleasant, and before that he did not even suspect that a simple meeting with a stranger could amaze and charm him so much. He still remembers not only her image and charming smile with warm hair, but also how she hugged him tightly and said that she would also be his guardian angel, and the guy himself at that time did not even believe that someone would ever tell him such a thing. The guy thoughtfully looked to the side with his red eyes and said the girl's words out loud, wondering why she said that she would also protect him, which made him sigh sometimes, as if intending to find answers to all his questions. He still continued to sit on the windowsill and dreamily look at the view from the window, asking himself when this charming girl would come to him, because it seemed that she was the only one he was waiting for. And while the stranger with red eyes was worried about the heroine, Rave herself was already in the garden with the annoying princess, because they were sitting at a table covered with various desserts, and Eli was offering her marshmallows on a filker, and the protagonist was uncomfortably silent, realizing that now she was not only spending time with Eli, but also offending her.
Eli told the heroine that she asked the cook to cook it especially for her, and when the princess also admitted that it was the maid named Reunited who said that the heroine was leaving them for last on purpose, Rave was indignant because now she can't even tear herself away from her new friend.
The pink-haired heroine became even more bored when the maid poured tea into her cup and realized that the princess now wanted to have tea in the near future. She would not even dare to do her own thing until Elle had played with her enough. The only thing that calmed her down was that she was only the princess's taster, but she was also irritated by the princess herself, who showed her the dishes with great care, which was definitely not there before, and offered Rave something to eat. Taking a closer look at the dish Rave saw in front of her, the heroine realized that it contained not only fried mushrooms, but also mysterious leaves of the theory, which is supposedly a medicinal plant that purifies the blood. The thing is that she learned this from her own encyclopedia, and also remembers hearing that if a child under 10 years old eats it, it can cause stomach pain, which made the heroine feel a little scared and uncomfortable. That's why she decided to act, turn her head to the Garincha, who was nearby, and call her to her, as if she had some question. While the red-haired princess at that time looked at her friend with curiosity, and also Rave's conversation with the maid was heard by a blue-haired maid named Reunited, who turned her head towards the noise when she heard that the little lady was talking to others about how the Todori leaves in the salad could cause stomach pain in a child. And when Rave explained to the others that she had read it from an encyclopedia, the maids consulted and decided to invite the chef of the palace personally in order to find out everything. And after some time, the cook actually appeared to the aristocrats with dishes in his hands and asked with displeasure why everyone was accusing him of something, because perhaps it was some kind of mistake. The cook tried to indignantly explain that those leaves had no side effects and were completely safe, but the mountaineers gathered around Princess Rave's table said that the pharmacist had already confirmed everything, and the leaves were indeed dangerous. Even the newspapers were talking about their harm. The maids also said that if it weren't for the pink-haired madam, the princess's life would have been in great danger. And then the cook looked at Rave with even more anger, as if she had set him up. After that, the chef was told to leave, telling him to be careful, and this upset him greatly, because he understood that most likely he would be fired for this, and therefore the heroine turned around, looking at him, and also thought about this, while the princess was only happy with the heroine's knowledge. The golden-haired lady was so happy about this that she hugged the pracknut and began to laugh, cheerfully telling everyone that her friend had just saved her from a stomachache and possible poisoning, and Rave was only surprised by the aristocrat's behavior. But as soon as the heroine noticed that the maids had a strange expression on their faces after this and were silent, she was surprised and opened her mouth, realizing that they all had to protect the princess from her, although now they no longer do this. She watched everything with complete shock and open mouth, and wanted to tell the maids that they shouldn't look at her so strangely, as if they had changed their minds about her, because on the contrary, she wanted to be as far away from the princess as possible. Only after some time did the heroine manage to escape from the princess and be alone with herself, and then she went to a part of the palace called the nobility wing, where she walked along the corridor past the adults and thought about how she felt like a chick that was fed by its mother. She walked past the tall wooden furniture and also thought about the fact that her work had ended earlier that day, all thanks to the work of the maids, thanks to which she could now devote time to her hobbies. The thing is, she was holding an envelope with a letter in her hands, realizing that today she had to say goodbye to the Duke of Vishellerberry, a tall blonde man with violet eyes, and thus thank him for his kindness and help, so that she could calmly continue working as a taster. She mentally supported herself and wanted to do it as soon as possible. However, recalling how she wrote this same letter earlier in her room, she understands that it seems that she should not do this, so as not to attract unnecessary attention. But as soon as the heroine went a little further with the thought that she still wanted to thank the Duke, she heard a conversation between two guys about the fact that Duke Vishellerberry allegedly refused to carry out the imperial decree, and this was also shocking news for the heroine, because she looked out from behind the closet. She got angry when she realized that they were talking about that annoying princess with whom she spent all her time, and they were discussing that it was only for this little thing that it was worth stopping the war, because the recent battle in Postorimo had ended. The heroine realized that she needed to find the Duke as quickly as she could, and she was already walking down the corridor, thinking about what the novel said, that the Duke had been preparing for an uprising on the battlefield for 10 years, and if this was true, it meant that the goal of the war in Postorimo was not an uprising at all, but something else. She saw a carriage from the window of the building and realized that the Duke she was looking for was sitting in it, thinking that in fact the aristocrat had not yet decided to rebel, although he was preparing to stand against the Emperor. Coming closer to the Duke's carriage, the girl remembered that in the novella, Duke Vishellerberry really did rebel. He himself said that he did it because he was bored, and he himself decided to take the throne. Although, now, when the lady had already come to the transport, she did not believe that such a quiet man was capable of this. He imagined the Emperor and Herod as shadows next to him, realizing that such a loyal man to the Emperor must have a reason to rebel, and the lady assumed that it was because of the Emperor's absolute power and his first strike. Having also imagined the scales, which seemed to be a symbol of the fact that decisions should be made together and everyone has the right to a voice, the girl realized that perhaps this was the fault of the tyrant emperor, who thought that he could command everything and everyone. She remembered how much the luxurious emperor loved his daughter, and at the same time sat on the throne with her, and with a smile, thinking that the lady would not be able to influence the imperial affairs in any way, because she was not even the main character in the novel. As her pink curls were blown about by the warm wind, and she was seriously thinking about the future of the empire, the girl laughed sadly and realized that her role was far from the most important, although this even made her a little happy. She only hoped that the Duke would win this fight, and even if he lost, she was sure that the son of the arrest with the same white hair and handsome appearance named Rowan would not leave it alone and would achieve victory. Rave remembered his story too, imagining him with glowing purple eyes and in the arms of the princess, because after he cruelly dealt with his cruel father, he began to completely obey Eli, which upsets her even more. The girl decided to put her envelope with the letter on the step of the carriage, with the thought that even if she told the Duke or anyone else about the future, nothing would have changed, and Rowan would still have killed the Duke, as he did in the original. And while Rave was yawning tiredly and realizing that the role of a secondary character did not allow her to change anything, she did not even suspect that at that time, the Duke, who was in the carriage, was shooting at her. The lady decided to knock on the door and tell the Duke that she sincerely believed in his success in the war and therefore wished him luck, and this made the white-haired aristocrat look out the window in surprise, not believing that the little girl had come to say goodbye to him personally. After that, the heroine left, and the Duke immediately decided to pick up the letter and read what the heroine had written to him, while his surprised subordinate was next to him, and the man himself read that in the letter the ice thanked him for his help and said that she was inspired by his kindness and wanted to become stronger. What surprised the subordinate even more was that the always strict master suddenly began to smile and say that such behavior was very similar to the upbringing of Felicity's family. And he also turned to his servant with a request that struck him the most. The thing is that the white-haired gentleman, with a satisfied smile, folded his legs and asked his subordinate to bring this girl here for a personal conversation. And at that time he hid the letter in his jacket, admitting that he wanted to talk to her in person. And while the Duke wanted to meet the main character as soon as possible, she herself spent time again with the princess and did not suspect that Vishelleberry wanted to meet her, because the princess again filled her head with different desserts and asked her to try each of them. As it turned out, when Rave told the princess that she didn't want to eat, Ella replied that she was worried about her, because she was very thin, and while the girl didn't understand whether Ella thought she was fat or thin, because today she said the opposite, the one who was also sitting at the table was looking at them. The thing is that this man is the princess's father, who is incredibly strict to everyone, including the protagonist, because he looked at her with his arms folded and smiled and told his daughter that her father was also sitting here. Rave thought that in front of her there was a predatory tiger that wanted to eat her, and the princess at that time answered her father, saying that she was just worried about her friend, and the emperor answered that she also needed to worry about herself, and he offered his daughter to eat as well. But when the princess also confessed to her father that she had been trying to get Rave's attention lately, the emperor suddenly became even more displeased, and his scary face looked at his daughter as if this was the last thing he wanted to hear. But he still stroked his daughter's head, and the heroine was scared. After telling Dad about the very incident when the main character saved everyone from the terrible salad leaves that could cause stomach pain, the golden-haired lady took Rave by the hand and told Dad that her friend was very smart, and the pink-haired lady kept quiet. Rave still thanked the princess for her attention, but she understood that after that moment, Elle began to spend a lot of time with her, and she did not like it, looking at the princess, who picked up a book and told her friend that she did not believe that she was so smart and therefore wanted to teach her something that puzzled the heroine. And the pink-haired girl had to remain silent, not understanding why the princess decided so, while at that time the emperor looked at her and thought about something of his own, and then menacingly said the name of his daughter. As it turned out, Dad wanted to ask his daughter with a smile about the tea party that she wanted to have soon, and the princess happily said that it would take place in a week, and she was trying to prepare it well, because it was her first tea party. Their time in the garden ended only when the princess approached her father and said, as if he remembered, that she still needed to check the necessary desserts for tea, and her father hugged his daughter with a smile, telling her that they would see each other at dinner then, advising her not to overwork herself. And the pink-haired girl was glad that everything was over. She also got up from the table and said goodbye to the princess, while the emperor waved after her. Although she looked sad, she thought that she also needed to check out the new desserts for tea. But as soon as she took even one extra step to the side, the emperor immediately stood in front of her and looked at her with folded hands as menacingly as possible, saying that she was that same traitor Felicity, which made it seem like everything around became darker, and the lady was seriously scared. The emperor said not only that the girl should be grateful to him, but also that her connection with the Duke of Vishelleberry posed a threat to her, and even more so to her princess, his daughter, about whom the emperor only thinks, which shocked Rave. The ruler also threatened the heroine to be more careful and not to endanger his daughter, which is why the frightened Rave bowed to the Lord and put her hand on her heart, saying that she would listen to him, although, in fact, she understands that the emperor does not care about her life one bit. After that moment, Rave realized that she would never forgive the emperor and would consider him her worst enemy, and a week later, the tea party came, for which everyone had been preparing so much, and thanks to which there were already tables with desserts and decorations in the garden. There were many noble people and guests in the garden, and Rave thought that because of the painstaking preparations for the tea party, she was incredibly tired, and did not even notice the moment when the day of the holiday arrived, and noble children were already sitting at the tables. Everyone gossiped about the main character, because they could clearly see her among the maids, the servants who were supposed to serve the guests, and they talked about how she had a tragic fate, and that they would definitely go crazy in her place, because she is an orphan and is a disgrace to many. As it turned out, Rave had specifically volunteered to help the maids in order to be as far away as possible from the princess, who in turn had already appeared at the celebration accompanied by servants, and greeted the guests with a smile. Taking a glass of apple juice in her hand, the golden-haired lady, in a charming dress, smiled at everyone and wished them to enjoy their rest, which made the other noble children very happy, and in return wished the main character of the novel the same. But as soon as the celebration began, chaos ensued in the garden, as the little children of the aristocrats began to scream out of possible discontent, such as a young boy saying that he already wanted to go home, while another girl was trying to play with him, grabbing the servant by the clothes, trying to calm everyone down.
The same situation was going on not far from them, as the ladies rushed to calm their children and held them while the girls cried and accused others of having eaten her cake and of having pulled someone else's hair, causing them to point fingers at each other.
And the pink-haired lady had to endure all this time and simply do her job, while others, calmer ones, sat at the tables and looked at all this, and the protagonist calmly brought them whores and understood that she was in chaos. One boy even asked the heroine if he could move, asking with shyness and embarrassment, and explaining that he wanted to be near the princess and not listen to strange quarrels and shouts from other children. And they spoke for the reason that near the princess's table it was not only quiet but also comfortable, and she seemed not to notice all the chaos, because she was sitting in her place and chatting nicely with her friends. So the boys wanted to join her. The pink-haired lady had only to smile sweetly and hope that the princess would soon come to them herself. But the boys insisted on their own and explained to her that they wanted to eat cake with the princess and wanted to listen to stories from her because it was already boring. And when one of the aristocrats asked the heroine if they really didn't care about her, since they had come such a long way just to get here, everything around the protagonist seemed to light up, and she smiled, trying not to let her rage out. The girl realized that they were taking out all their disappointment on her, and that it could all end if it wasn't stopped, and then she decided to roll up her sleeves with a stern look and resolutely go to meet the hooligans in order to calm them down. But as soon as she moved even a little away from her place, she heard a loud sound nearby, because one of the ladies hit the table with her hands as if a real quarrel was about to start there due to a misunderstanding.
She froze for a moment and actually heard one brown-haired girl standing next to the others and the princess saying that she meant something completely different, and the shocked Rave understood that the situation could get even worse.
And while the main character was wondering what was going on, she noticed a girl who was already trying to explain with fear that she just wanted to say that the words about the princess, in her opinion, sounded too offensive when a girl named Jacqueline spoke about her. But this did not please the golden-haired princess even more, who looked at Lady Brown with a displeased look and asked if she even knew what she was doing now, gently hinting that her behavior was inappropriate here. The princess and the others continued to sit at the table when the aristocrat was telling, saying that she understood that Lady Brown was worried about her, and then the princess interrupted herself, trying to prove that her position was correct, and Jacqueline was really rude, but Eli asked her to listen to the end. The thing is that the princess wanted to tell everyone that she herself would decide whether her words had offended others, and the same applies to Lady Jacqueline, who at the same time was sitting next to the red-eyed lady and looking at Brown with displeasure, with her hands folded. Lady Brown seemed to be completely upset and was ready to cry when the princess sternly said that she should not have interfered in the conversation, and only after that she fell silent not wanting to prove her position anymore. After that, Lady Brown asked everyone with embarrassment if they should listen to Lady Jacqueline to clarify the situation, and the princess said that it was a good idea, and at that time, the main character looked at them with surprised emotions. The heroine looked at the company and understood that it was stupid to contradict the princess's best friend named Jacqueline, because Eli would always protect her. And she also looked at Jacqueline and remembered that she was an aristocrat who was reunited with her family thanks to the princess and was now smiling. Now looking at her, the protagonist sees only a little girl, but already knows that in the future, according to the plot of the novel, she will become not only a beautiful lady with black hair, but also the one who will lead all processes in the highest aristocracy and will dominate. Also looking at Lady Brown, who was hanging her head down because of the cold, Protagoniotka understood that perhaps she did this because she wanted to get closer to the princess, but she failed to get her attention. Deciding to cheer up and reunite the girls, Rave picked up the prince and princess dolls and began to play with them in front of the three lovely ladies, thereby telling a charming story about royal love, which made the three girlfriends delighted. Holding the dolls in her hands, the pink-haired Ice smiled and told the children that they had overcome many difficulties together, and after all this lived happily ever after. And the ladies watching this performance were delighted and wanted to see more stories from the heroine. Even the other aristocrats noticed that there was merriment nearby, because the three girls began to ask the heroine about what happened to the prince and princess next, and whether they had a wedding, which made the aristocrats and children look at them with defeat. And right behind the traffic cop heroine, adults had already gathered, pretending to do nothing, although they were actually listening to the heroine. The protagonist was telling three girls that she would now tell them a story about an empire where dragons ruled, and so she began a new story. The girl realized that perhaps she was the only one who did the work and continued to amuse others, and for a moment she thought that she, on the contrary, should not attract attention to herself. But she still decided to play with dolls and tell the girls her stories with a smile. Having imagined dolls and desserts on the table, the girl realized that tea drinking is not really meant for children, because it is customary to just sit and talk, and the children probably want to play and have fun as if it's some kind of holiday. And so, even a few days later, when the tea party was over and a blue-haired girl was sitting at her desk in her office, busy with paperwork, she held a letter in her hands and asked the heroine to pick up the gifts for her, because the girls to whom she told stories turned out to be pleased and grateful to her. Even when the pink-haired lady took the boxes with gifts in her hands, she asked the servants several times if they were really for her and not for the princess. And to this the girl replied that those girls were satisfied with the tea party only thanks to her, and therefore she should accept the gifts and thank them. At first the protagonist was surprised, still holding 3 large boxes of gifts in the moats. But then she realized that the servant was right, and it seemed that she really was able to amuse the aristocrats at the tea party and please them. And when the girl was about to leave, having scolded the servant for everything before, she was already heading towards the door, barely able to carry the boxes on her. But suddenly the girl at the table asked a strange question, like, had she insulted the imperial knights before? She was surprised and immediately turned to the servant, not understanding what the woman meant, and then looked at her with her lips slightly open. But then the woman explained that it was the imperial knights who were looking for her now. The girl sitting at the white table explained that the imperial knights were looking for that very child from the infirmary, and therefore asked the little girl if she was there on that very day when the injured knights were brought into the corridor. But when the woman admitted that they looked quite angry and dissatisfied, asking about a certain girl, the heroine finally dropped the gifts from her hands, became agitated, and realized that it seemed she had done something serious. And the lady who was sitting at the table and holding a document in her hands, looking at the heroine as if she did not understand her behavior at all, which was true, and waiting for answers from her with a puzzled face, could not help but pay attention to this. But surprisingly, the woman looked at the girl, who was already picking up all the fallen gifts from the floor and turning around with a smile. saying that she had only seen those soldiers briefly and therefore could not help in any way, although in fact everything was not so. And then she left the room, telling the lady that she had something important to tell her, and then she found herself by her own bed, laying her head on it in sadness and devastation, realizing that perhaps it was all over for her. She was shaking with fear and kept wondering why the Imperial Knights were looking for her and looked angry. Probably because they wanted to teach her a lesson, because in fact the lady had done something bad. She grabbed her head and began to think harder, afraid that the soldier had died from her petals, which she had given him to try when he was dying, and now everyone was angry with her and wanted to find her as soon as possible. The lady even imagined how that very knight was already lying dead in a coffin and his friends were gathering around him, mourning the tragedy and saying that they would definitely avenge him and do everything possible to find that very girl. The heroine, realizing this, even wanted to shout to the entire Imperial Palace that she was incredibly scared, and it seemed that all the Imperial Knights were blaming her for the death of their soldier. But, still being in a large castle with a dark roof, she did not dare to panic so much. Instead, she began to walk anxiously around the room, sometimes falling onto the bed and talking to herself, saying that she had simply shared the healing leaves with the dying soldier, wanting to save him and thus giving him her own life. And now punishment awaited her. She realized that if she told the whole truth about the flower, they might make a new, stronger poison or tear off the entire clearing of plants that were precious to her. And then she became sad, realizing that she had to keep everything a secret just to survive. Rave was upset, and then she asked herself what she would do if this misunderstanding never cleared up. And then she was happy, clenching her hands into fists and motivationally telling herself that she could pretend to be stupid and avoid punishment. And she remembered that even if others were to investigate the flower, they would understand that it was poisonous. In the end, the girl only understood that she needed to rest, and therefore decided to wrap herself in a blanket and lie on the bed, realizing that in any case, she needed to do everything in order to survive. But in her thoughts, when the lady was thinking about what else this cruel world would present to her, a red-eyed guy suddenly appeared, looking straight at her, and she remembered that she just wanted to meet him, and he himself was probably waiting for her. But in the end, the heroine decided to focus on her problems for now, which is why she stayed in her room, and the very next day, a knight appeared in front of her, who, with folded hands, sternly called her name. He turned out to be very tall and looked very intently at the main character, clarifying whether she was the same girl who helped one warrior and thereby healed him. And a chill seemed to run through the little lady's body, and she realized that she still couldn't run away from the problem. The lady said uncertainly, "That's all," already expecting him to punish her as cruelly as possible. And she was even more afraid because in front of her was not just a black-haired knight, but their imperial captain, leading the ruler's army. His name is Dominic, and the lady immediately imagined him with a long sword in his hands, because he is a true master of combat, an outstanding knight of the Imperial Palace, and he is the one who dedicated his knightly bet to the princess, without even offering it to the Emperor himself. The pink-haired lady in front of him looked at the knight with an elongated face, as the Imperial warrior himself, loyal to the princess, once again asked the heroine if she had given the magic flower to Lord Eden a few days ago, and the little girl was even more scared because of it. The protagonist remembered that even a few days earlier, during her next working day, when the girl was sitting at a table in the garden and tasting dishes with the princess, the knight Dominic was sitting next to them and was already staring at the heroine, which is why she realized that he suspected her of something. The heroine realized that she could do nothing, and therefore decided to confess, put her hand on her cleavage, and looked at the knight, saying that she gave that knight medicine. And she also thought about the fact that, in fact, she had not done anything bad. However, the heroine decided to lie about the magic flower, because she did not say a word about it, but explained to the Imperial Knight that she healed that warrior with the help of one purple potion, which she imagined in the hands of one wizard because it is considered the hereditary medicine of the Felicity family. Hearing this, the imperial warrior Dominic not only believed the little girl, but also began to speak thoughtfully, saying that it seemed so because her family really had a good pharmaceutical company in the empire and sold good medicines. He also began to actively gesture with his hands and tell the little girl that he didn't want to scare her and therefore asks for forgiveness. And if he did scare her, he says that he just wants to sort everything out. But he also knelt down in front of the protagonist and said that she should have told him this from the very beginning, because in fact he came to her in order to sincerely thank her for saving Mr. Eden. And while the girl was amazed that the imperial warrior was now bowing before her as if she were a princess, he just laid his hand on the top of her head with a smile and said that all this happened thanks to her, and he said again that he was very grateful to her, and Rave embarrassedly replied that she was glad to help everyone. Then the girl sadly lowered her head and thought about Dominic's words, while his hand was still on her head, and she sadly answered that everything was not as he said. But this answer, it seems, did not satisfy Dominic, and therefore he stood up and told Agrena that she became his savior, and therefore sincerely says that if she also needs some help, he will gladly repay her with the same kindness and courage. This struck the main character so much that she looked at the warrior with burning emerald eyes and understood that now someone noticed her true intentions. But deep in her soul, she knew that she should not get involved in this even more, because she had already allowed herself to save the Lord earlier. She imagined the Emperor and his daughter surrounded by blue darkness, because for her these are practically the most terrible people in her life, capable of taking her life with just one order. And for that reason, she has long understood that getting involved with all the characters in the novel is a bad idea. But she also remembered the face of the red-eyed boy, realizing that she had promised him a long time ago to come. And at that moment, he looked at her with such surprise that the lady, already at that moment, understood that she had to keep her promise and meet him, even though she did not know his name and where he lived. That's why she decided to act and grabbed the Imperial Knight by his clothes and stopped him, saying that she wanted to ask him for a favor, but he was already turning to the heroine in surprise. With full confidence and intentions to use her last chance, she looked at Dominic and said that she wanted to meet the Duke, who has red eyes, black hair, and is a guy a little older than her. And so, a few days later, when the knight finally agreed to help the girl, she was already in the forest when it was dark around, and only the moonlight illuminated her path. And the protagonist herself looked into the distance in surprise, still not believing that the knight had decided to help her. The girl thought about the fact that at first the Imperial Knight said that if something terrible happened to the Duke, he would not be able to leave it like that. But in the end, he still decided to help the heroine. So he poisoned Lord Eden, who had already met the main character with a smile and introduced himself, saying that he was the one she had saved earlier. Rave was surprised by his appearance and did not even immediately recognize him. But even more unexpected for her was the fact that the Lord cheerfully and easily lifted her into the air, saying that he thanked her for her help and that he was now ready to be her personal bodyguard in case something happened. After that, taking the girl in his arms, Vonnie went through the forest and told the heroine that it was quite dangerous here, and also wanted to apologize to her for being late, explaining that the illness had confined him to bed and he could not walk normally. The pink-haired lady inquired about Eden's condition and asked him about his well-being, and the warrior only replied that she should not worry about it and that his stamina had only decreased slightly. The girl laughed, saying that he shouldn't try too hard anyway if he was given a second chance at life and salvation, and the initially serious-minded guy was amazed by the heroine's words. But when Rave also sadly admitted that most likely, after this night, they would not even meet, because she was the princess's personal taster and was also a traitor to everyone, the white-haired warrior looked into her eyes and asked if she wanted to accidentally escape from the imperial palace. And the main character, suddenly remembering that this could be a test of loyalty to the princess, which Vian is conducting, exclaimed that she was satisfied with everything, and she did not even have a thought about escaping, which amazed the silent Eden. However, after that he smiled, amazed by the character of the little girl and her inner strength, said that he understood her completely, and the protagonist, in response, only smiled even more, and continued to say that she was devoted to the Emperor forever. They continued walking, and Vonnie said that she could still count on his help at any moment, and for this the pink-haired baby thanked him again. And after a while they came to their destination, and Eden extended his hand forward, telling his partner about it. The warrior did not let go of the girl from his own embrace, and carried her further, approaching an overgrown and stone fence that looks very old, as if no one had lived here since the beginning of the last century. Turning her head, the heroine did not expect to see an ordinary-looking stone castle, even without a luxurious garden or light sources, which made her a little scared because the house did not make any sounds, being like an abandoned building, but definitely not the place where the Duke lives. She wondered out loud if this was really a castle, and she also looked at the scary fence, completely overgrown with grass, and she also wondered why the imperial palace was located next to the forest of the dead, and, as it turned out, next to this castle. Having passed through the gates, which creaked and made it even more frightening, the girl climbed down from the warrior's arms and looked around better, turning her head in different directions, and not believing that a duke lived here, and Eden, it seemed, was no less surprised. But Eden also addressed her with words about how he hoped that the protagonist remembered that no one could be told about this place, and the commander of the Imperial Knights ordered both of them to do this, and the lady looked at him with surprise. She was even more alarmed by the warrior's words that wherever she went and whatever she did, there would always be ears and eyes around her that would watch her every step, and the lady realized that Eden meant constant surveillance and spying that could be directed at them. Rave told her partner that she would remember this, and after that they decided to enter an abandoned building together, covered in cobwebs and a thick layer of dust. And the hall they both ended up in was high and old. Only the light from the windows helped them navigate. The girl walked around the space and thought that no one had ever looked after this place, and she still hardly believed that someone could live here. But the belief in something else still made her walk and look around further. The lady ran her hand along the wooden partition and saw grey dust on her fingers, not understanding how her red-eyed friend could live in such a place, and why he was settled here in the first place. Then she wondered why the Emperor had locked the little boy in such a terrible place, where there was not a single adult, food or water, but only dust. Terrible grinding sounds. Lots of dust, and an echo from every step on the floor. She remembered that in the original, the Duke was mentioned only twice, and Liam, the Emperor, killed all his siblings, imprisoned his remaining living nephew, and then took the throne. And imagining two different puzzles, the girl realized that now everyone considers Princess Elle to be the only heir. Although this is not so. And when the girl was wondering why the Emperor had not yet killed or simply gotten rid of the Duke, she noticed that her little friend was standing near the window, who turned around, looking at the heroine, and did not expect to see her here at all. Looking at the red-eyed boy, who seemed astonished by the appearance of the lady, who at that moment clearly understood that he was still very useful, the Duke opened his lips and looked at her intently, asking why she was here. And the pink-haired lady, with beautiful curls and a charming face, smiled at her friend and said that she had come to him, as she had said. But the guy kept looking at her in shock, not expecting at all that his friend would come to him. Imagining the silhouette of the current Emperor Liam, the girl remembered that the Duke, unlike him, has legitimacy, that is, recognition of his power by society, because the current ruler is a usurper who rebelled and stole the throne, and because of the lack of legitimacy, he has many enemies who want to overthrow him. And on the other hand, the Duke is the son of the former Crown Prince, and is currently the only heir to the Empire, who should have been in red robes and with a crown on his head. The current Emperor, imagining him in a mysterious room, looking at the portrait of the Duke, The girl realized that this is exactly what the Emperor took advantage of when he gained power, and therefore those who decide to rebel against him will have to find the Duke first.
The girl realized that this red-eyed boy was not killed because the Emperor wanted to use him to identify traitors, and the Duke himself was bait. But now, when he looks at the heroine, he fearfully asks her if she wants to hear his name.
To the opponent's surprise, the guy remained calm and put his hand on the windowsill, looking at her with bright eyes and seriously asking why she wanted to know his name. Because for him, any action of the heroine could seem strange. After that, he turned away and said that he didn't want to be friends with her and that she should leave because he didn't know the lady's intentions. But the pink-haired protagonist still didn't leave, saying that if he was really getting tired of her, she would leave. The girl decided to start talking to the boy, not as an aristocrat, but as a friend, and also came closer to him with a smile and said that she just wanted to talk to him, which surprised the Duke and made him think. What struck him even more was that the girl looked at him with a smile and extended her hand, saying that she wanted to fully introduce herself to him. So she said her name, adding the information that she loved to read and liked books of all genres. Having also told the guy that her favorite book was the biography of the adventurer Kevin, and having confessed that she wanted to board a big ship someday and go on a journey, just like that same Kevin, the girl approached the aristocrat closer and seemed to glow with kindness and sweetness. But unlike Rave, who wanted to meet the guy with an incredible desire, the Duke himself hastened to move away from her, threateningly saying that her words sounded like nonsense, because she would never be able to leave this place, which made the girl shut up. Even when the lady said that she plans to leave one day, when she serves the Duke for a long time and is happy, to which the guy responded with a disgruntled grumble and began to go down the stairs. But the protagonist followed him down and suddenly said that she plans to make him happy too, which is why he turned around in surprise. She approached him and leaned over, whispering that she would definitely show him the path to happiness, and therefore wanted the guy to listen to her and for them to be friends. But the brunette was silent and looked at the little girl in amazement. Both continued to descend the wide and large staircase, and the Duke remained silent, neither agreeing nor denying the words of the lady, who never tired of asking the young man if she could visit him again. And at that moment, they had no idea that there were really ears and eyes around them in the form of a hidden spy with a dark cape, who did not make a sound and was somewhere on the ceiling, looking at the children from afar and listening to their conversations. The fact is that the spy not only eavesdropped on the children's conversation, but also, with the help of his magic eyes, showed the Emperor what he saw in real time, and his visions were shown on the magic ball. But the ruler did not even look at him, turning to the window and listening to his spy's proposal to get rid of the heroine. But the Emperor looked away and told his partner that there was no need for that, because it seemed that his daughter liked this girl, and most likely Rave was just annoying him. But the girl's words that she could escape so easily still touched the Emperor, and he thought about it, and he looked out the window predatorily and told the spy that in that case he would want to get rid of not only Rave, but also the Herug, and for that he would only need to find the perfect moment. That's what the Emperor thought. And then the next day quickly arrived, when the sky was clear over the imperial palace, and there was already a lot of noise in it from early morning, because no one was shouting that they had just made a historic discovery. The thing is, in one room a certain teacher was looking through his students' work, and said with defeat that it was impossible, and he had never seen such answers to questions, especially when one of them had not been answered for 100 years. And the teacher's student turned out to be a princess, who was sitting at the table and holding a pen in her hands for writing, but she said with a smile that the professor was simply exaggerating, not seeing anything amazing in his student's work. The professor continued to be very emotional, telling the princess that her work, if he could, would immediately send to the conference, after which he sat down on the snow-white sofa, and the princess next to him only laughed, saying that he was too emotional. And while the professor admired his student's skills and told her that he could help her with the presentation, the main character, who, on the contrary, was not engaged in studies or conferences, was already looking at them, because she was sitting under the window on a soft pillow, calmly sewing some fabric, and it brought her pleasure, because she was smiling and enjoying her own rest, when the princess did not bother her, and others did not demand work. The girl remembered the original plot because she knew that it was the professor who made the discovery, and not the princess. But then she looked at how the teacher left, smiling at the aristocrat in farewell, and saying that he would bring a draft of the work to the next lesson, and Elle smiled back at him. Elle stretched sweetly, and began to smile more when the Gorons came to her, and asked if the princess was tired. But the girl answered that this was absolutely not the case, but she wanted to eat something sweet. But when the protagonist was thinking about how the amount of food with poison had become strangely larger lately, which scared her, the princess came up to her and asked the pink-haired little girl why she was still sewing, and she replied that she wanted to finish already. The princess did not listen to the girl and pulled her by the hand, saying that they should go to class together, and the protagist smiled with pretense, because she was not sure about this idea. And that is why she told the aristocrat that she did not understand anything about them. But Ella still told the main character that she was very smart, and therefore she should definitely attend the class, which is why Rave was already at the table, laughing uncertainly, while the maids walked around them and prepared sweet desserts. A girl with blue hair named Ranielle decided to approach her, put her hands on the princess's shoulders, and told her with a smile that she was very smart and gifted, which could not help but please others. But she also said that she thought that Rave, unlike her, was not as smart and talented. Hearing this, the girl fell silent and looked at the princess with sadness, especially when Elle and the Gorincha talked about the fact that the emperor still had not found the one who was spreading poison into the dishes. But the ruler promised that he would find the scoundrel. But she also imagined a dark cape with pink poison, realizing that this secret would be revealed to everyone only when 10 years had passed, and the identity of the culprit would become known to everyone. And this bad man has the goal not only to poison the necessary, noble people, but also to take away from the emperor the most precious thing, that is a child, a beautiful and happy daughter, who at the time of those events will already be about 18 years old. The girl realized that the killer did not want to poison the princess yet, and was still experimenting with poisons, which even sounded terrible to her. But at that moment, she noticed that the maid had put a certain plate on the table and was already moving her hand away. And when the maid told that this was a lunch specially for the heroine, in which there were only apples and bananas, so that the load on her stomach would be reduced, and at first the princess doubted, asking if it was really healthy. But the pink-haired lady only grabbed the apples in her hands and said that everything suited her, and she also thanked Julia for her concern. But when the protagonist was thinking about why she was given fruits at all, which are more expensive than other food, especially if they look so strange, she noticed that the same maid next to her was acting quite strangely. The thing is that the maid named Julia was embarrassed and did not even look at the girl, because she was embarrassed by the words of gratitude from the protagonist, because servants rarely hear such speeches from aristocrats. And the apple immediately fell out of the main character's hands, because she looked at the maid Julia's reaction with defeat, and did not believe that simple words of gratitude could embarrass someone so much. This made the blonde Elle smile and laugh sweetly, saying that it seemed like Rave had already managed to become friends with everyone, and this also made her incredibly happy, and she also understood that the heroine had become a closer friend. But as soon as the heroine was left alone and thought about everything that had happened, the girl lay on the bed and hugged the pillow, screaming why the maids changed their attitude towards her, just because of the princess's mood. Because it's unfair. The pink-haired lady looked forward with her mouth open and seemed to understand that something was wrong here, because she was not satisfied with the strange behavior of everyone around her, which was constantly changing only because of the princess and her words. The girl said that it was still better than what had happened before, and she also asked the Duke about it, who was also lying in her room and reading a book, looking thoughtfully at the girl with her own thoughts. She didn't manage to find out the guy's opinion, because he asked in response why she was asking him about it, because he didn't want to be distracted from reading the book. But the lady decided not to despair and began to tell that if he got bored, he could look into the next room. She explained that she had put several books on the second shelf and that she strongly recommended reading them, but it turned out that this was not the case, because in fact the girl had left a note for the Duke in one of the books, which spoke of the only way for the boy to survive. The girl could not tell him everything directly for the reason that she was afraid that they would be eavesdropped on, and while the Duke did not think about it, he slammed the book shut and told the girl that he did not want to count, because he thought that boring books about adventures were waiting for him in the next room. But the protagonist still wanted to awaken in the boy the desire to at least read one book. So she began to talk about the blue sea, breathtaking journeys in seas, asking enthusiastically why he was not interested in this. In the end, the black-haired Duke lay down on the bed and said that he would still read her book, but then told the heroine to leave, which the girl was outraged by, hitting the bed with a pillow and telling the boy that only half an hour had passed since their meeting. The lady had to get up and pack all her things into her bag, saying that she hoped that he would read her books in another room and not just tell her to read them. Also, the black-haired guy looked at her and said that he was already tired of her presence. But when the girl was about to go and leave the room, the Duke suddenly told her that he really wasn't going to pretend that he was just going to read her books, and so he turned away and didn't look at his friend, although it was noticeable that his ears were red from embarrassment. Rave noticed this perfectly and realized that in fact the boy was not going to distance himself from her, but on the contrary, he wanted them to become friends, although he did not open up to this right away, which surprised her. This is how the heroine spent her time in the Duke's castle, after which, a few days later, she was already having fun on a long boat with a roof, which calmly floated on the lake, and on it was not only she, but also other aristocratic women. The pink-haired Delcher looked at the cute princess, who was wearing a pink dress, clapping her hands, saying that now she would introduce her to her best friends from the high nobility, and the protagonist felt very awkward when she saw in front of her two girls of about the same age as Elle, who were looking at her with a sly smile and curiosity, and among them was the very one, the princess's best friend. They all continued to sail on the boat on the large crystal-clear lake, when one aristocrat confessed that she had heard that Rave was great at the tea party, because she was able to amuse everyone with games with dolls and different stories. The girl with blue hair drank tea and said that even Lady Donna was delighted that day, although few people received her approval, and another girl said with a smile that she envied Rave for getting along easily with people. The blue-haired lady, named Michelle and the daughter of a powerful marquis, told her friend that she shouldn't remember the very incident when she couldn't find a common language with one aristocrat at a tea party, because now they decided to talk about something good. The princess decided to tell her best friend that she better not remember this, because Lady Brown was simply wrong at that moment. And while the protagonist was silent with a sad face, Michelle also told her friend that it was not worth communicating with people like Brown. And when Michelle confessed to the princess that she even wanted to take revenge on Lady Brown, but was still glad that her parents' business fell apart only thanks to the princess, the golden-haired Ella only laughed and was embarrassed, and Rave behind her was awkwardly silent, realizing that she was uncomfortable being around such evil children, while the pink-haired lady was thinking about why they liked to discuss and rejoice at other people's misfortunes. One girl informed the princess that news about Prince Vixelaberry had recently been revealed, which made Elle surprised and asked what kind of news it was. When a large carp swam past the aristocrat's boat, one of them said that the prince's health had improved and that he had now even begun to learn how to manage his possessions. The princess was so happy about this news that she did not hide her emotions. With a sweet smile and charm, she told everyone that now this pleases her most of all, and at that time others were touched by Ella's behavior. But Michelle also hastened to tell everyone, another piece of news, related to the fact that the soldiers sent to war in Rubendisi had already been crowned. The protagonist immediately imagined in her head not only a large map with areas, but also Duke Cassius, who is covered in blood and actually protects these lands, because they are his possessions, and the princess's best friend spoke about this. She also asked everyone whether this duke should have been sent on a campaign, and when others started talking about how he, an invincible warrior, himself refused to follow orders, everyone was surprised, and the heroine only became more worried, realizing that much blood would be shed in this war. Rave was a little bored and kept silent, while the aristocrats talked freely about war and cruelty, and she herself thought about the fish that swam around and were cute. And most of all, she wanted to see the sea, even wished that the current would bring this boat to it. Looking into the water, she remembered with longing that when she reads books about travel, sailing in the oceans, she feels as if she is on a ship, and even though she is now in a boat, she would like to feel true freedom, to be among the vastness of the sea. But suddenly, the Gersina noticed something that had not been tried, and when she raised her eyes and looked ahead, what we had seen, she clearly noticed that the lake seemed to be covered with sand, precisely so that they could not float away further. But why everything was like that remained a mystery to everyone. After the maids approached the aristocrats and asked them how they were feeling, since there had been a sudden jolt earlier, the hairy Gurn looked at the strange Persian in surprise, while the servants shouted that they would have to go ashore since there was no further way. A strange feeling settled in the soul of the main character that it was her fault that they could not sail further, but it also seemed that she did not notice at all that around their boat, closer to the shore, the same green butterfly that would come to her earlier through the bedroom window was flying. As it turned out, a certain pile of sand on their way turned out to be a landslide, which blocked the flow of the river, and because of this, the boat was already mooring on the shore in order to finish their pleasant pastime. But the whole celebration did not end there, because the princess and her friends decided to have a picnic on the grass and in the fresh air, thanks to which delicious desserts, torso, cupcakes and cookies were already laid out on a light blanket. The girls continued to laugh and talk about a variety of topics, enjoying the rest and lifting their spirits, while the protagonist sat next to them and with a thoughtful look just prayed to God that all this would soon end, because she was incredibly bored. Rave once again presented a plate of dessert to her face, and before trying it for poison, she seemed to touch her face, not realizing how many poisoned desserts she had already eaten during the walk. And it was this strange command that the princess noticed. Suddenly, Elle asked the pink-haired girl if they had offended her by accident, and Rave was amazed by this. Looking at the princess with surprise, she didn't think that anyone would pay attention to her anymore. And also the golden-haired lady explained that when they started talking about Duke Cassius, her behavior changed. The main character immediately rushed to correct the situation and not try to upset the princess anymore. So she began to diligently smear her hands in front of her, saying that everything was fine and it just seemed that way to her. Suddenly, the protagonist began to talk about how Duke Cassius had simply helped her a few times. But there was no friendship between them, and then she herself began to wonder with excitement why she was saying this and explaining herself when there were maids and aristocrats nearby. When the other girlfriends were listening attentively to the conversation, and the heroine was telling the princess that she was just sleepy, suddenly Elle interrupted her and happily grabbed her hands, saying that she had a good idea to go together to the upcoming festival. Hearing this, the protagonist immediately became worried because she remembered that it was precisely when the novel described the vestibule and how the princess was wearing it, everything ended with her being kidnapped and the baby being carried away on his shoulders by an unknown person in a secret cape. The heroine also understands that such a minor and unimportant character like her will definitely die if she ends up there, and so she realized that she should never go to the festival, even when in front of her is now a joyful Ella and others who are anticipating having fun with Rave. But after some time, when the heroine still could not refuse the princess's offer, she was already at the festival and holding sweets in her hands, waiting for Elle. And her hair color was also changed so that no one would recognize her as a member of the imperial palace, for safety.
And soon the princess appeared, whose hair color had also been changed, and she, with a smile and a charming laugh, pounced on the heroine, saying that they would have a lot of fun and that she was glad that Rave had decided to go with her.
They walked past the city residence together, or rather, the princess held Reeve's hand and said that they should have time to visit the circus while they were waiting for her other friends, and the little girl only quietly agreed with her. Rave sighed heavily and thought sadly that being in a busy place was at least safer than walking anywhere, and the princess, meanwhile, continued to cheerfully and smilingly tell her friend that there were many animals in the circus, and she wanted to see them all. But when the heroine decided to raise her eyes up and take a closer look at the passers-by, suddenly, among them, she noticed a guy who looked very similar to the very kidnapper of the princess, and was seriously scared, passing through a lively crowd. It took her a few seconds to be frightened by the sight of the princess and to be squeezed among the many city dwellers who did not allow her to go further, and she herself understood that now she would have to look for Elle. The girl managed to get out of the large crowd of people and stop near the wall of one house to catch her breath and figure out what to do next, still holding the sweets in her hands and sighing heavily, because she was almost trampled right there. The excitement in her soul grew and grew, which is why she began to circle around the narrow street and try to see the princess and every passerby, hoping that she was somewhere nearby, and noticed the disappearance of the protagonist. But everything turned out to be more serious. Imagining the image of a cute princess with darker hair than usual and holding pink cotton candy, the heroine realized that she seemed to have lost her, especially since Ella's dull appearance could have a negative impact on the search, since she is not so noticeable. Time passed, and there was already a golden red sunset over the city, which painted all the tall buildings in a sunny shade. But Rave still could not find Elle. She was worried that the princess was looking in the wrong place, or that she had already been kidnapped. The girl decided to sit down behind the fence next to the flower beds, looking out for each small child in the crowd, and hoping that she would still be able to find the princess. Because, as it turned out, she really wasn't that noticeable in a large crowd. She sighed at the gravity of the situation, scratching her neck and realizing that if she wandered around the city, she would end up lost, and she also assumed that the princess didn't seem to be busy looking for her, but was having fun with the others if she hadn't shown up yet. Gagia realized that she felt like that same child who had lost her mother, and it was at that moment that she saw two children next to her who, as it turned out, were also lost and were talking about their mother, who would soon find them. The girl decided to help them and said that there were guards nearby and they could be asked to find their mother. In addition, their parents themselves could be standing there, and these words gave the girl and the boy hope that they would be reunited with their family, and therefore they stopped crying. But as it turned out, the children did not decide to go to the guards, because their mother had previously told them not to go anywhere, not even for a step, and so Rave realized that she just had to cheer them up, which is why she looked at everyone with a smile, offering them to listen to a funny story. And when the heroine began to tell the village children a story about a certain princess, when they all sat down behind the fence, the protagonist herself did not notice how Ella was watching her and was silent, while her friends behind her said that Rave was really strange, because she could constantly establish contact with people.
The princess looked at Ray as if she didn't expect that her friend would have fun not with her, but with other children, and that's why her look with a folding second was sadder, and in her hands were 2 ice creams, one of which was for Rave.
And Elle decided to turn to Michelle and her best friend, telling them with kindness and sincerity that she realized that Rave was the kind person who was kind to everyone, regardless of status, even if her family recognized them as traitors. Even when Michelle skeptically said that the princess shouldn't get attached to Rave anyway, Elle thought about the fact that even in adulthood, when the heroine will have luxurious pink hair and grace, she will still be sweet and kind to everyone, because of her no less noble soul. Elle thought about herself, imagining herself as an adult, sad and devastated in the tall mirror, because after all this time, she would never be able to be even a little bit like Rave, as pure in soul and pleasant for everyone. And while the princess was thinking about the future and already wanted to reunite with Rave, those same children who had previously lost their mother were able to reunite with her and solemnly held hands, never to be separated again. And Rave waved goodbye to them, which made not only the mother happy, but also her son and daughter, because thanks only to the protagonist, who was next to them, even as the night approached, they were able to remain calm and reunite with their parents. After that she stretched, already wanted to go and ask the Fears, asking them for help. But at that very moment, the princess appeared in front of her, who stopped nearby. But as soon as the little princess appeared next to the main character, Rave suddenly got up from her seat and awkwardly scratched her neck, explaining to the aristocrat that she was just escorting the lost children home. But Elle was only glad to see her. Rave and Elle were about to go, but were still stuck in the same dark alley when the protagonist asked the lady if she was in pain. But the princess only calmly replied that everything was fine and there was no need to worry.
Noticing that the princess looked quite depressed and her mood was no longer as cheerful as at the beginning of the festival, Rave hastened to ask her with curiosity if her legs hurt, because they had walked a lot together today.
What surprised the heroine even more was that the princess in front of her did not want to answer questions at all, but only asked Rave if he wanted to go to the Flower Lantern Festival, which surprised the protagonist even more. The heroine tried to explain to Elle that it was already night and they should have returned home a long time ago. But the princess insisted on her own, admitting that they had spent very little time together, and it seemed that this was what was upsetting her, and they continued to stand next to each other. Rave didn't have to refuse for long, because the princess simply grabbed her hand and tried to lead her again, pointing her finger into the distance and cheerfully saying that now they would go and buy lanterns together to join the festival. Two charming girls found themselves in front of a shop where the seller was already listening to the princess's demands to give them 2 donors, and at this time Rave was worried, but reassured herself that perhaps the Imperial Knights who were supposed to protect them were nearby and everything should be fine. But when the girl was anxiously trying to convince herself that nothing bad would happen, in the dark forest not far from them, some killers were already operating who had managed to deal with all the guards, and one of them, with white hair, was informing the others about this, now ordering them to move towards the princess. It seemed that the fear of the unknown and something to come ran across the skin of the little lady, and it made her freeze, listening to her feelings with a shocked face, because her intuition tells her that something terrible is about to happen. Holding the lantern they had bought earlier, the girl looked around and tried to figure out if she was imagining things. But the princess was already looking at something surprising to herself, pointing at her with her finger and asking her friend to look ahead. The fact is that there was no danger or warriors in front of them, because the girls noticed many bright lanterns that the city residents had already managed to launch into the water to float downstream, having made a wish before doing so. The golden-haired girl told Rave that it was incredibly beautiful and that she liked it more and more. But she was very surprised when the protagonist suddenly looked closely at the lanterns and said that they were exactly the same color as her eyes, red and rich. Rave's words struck Elle so much that she thought about something deeper for a moment, and after a while, when they were at the shore, getting ready to launch lanterns into the water, the princess admitted that she considered Rave very kind, and the lady in Ovid just looked at her in surprise and said what she meant. And the pink-haired girl with green eyes was even more amazed by the fact that the princess sincerely said that she actually knew about her for a much longer time than everyone thought. Each time, according to the princess, it makes her think harder. When the heroine clarified what she meant, the princess only laughed it off, explaining that she heard a lot of rumors and talk in the palace. For example, that her friend was very smart and capable. And upon hearing this, Rave was amazed to the depths of her soul, not understanding how such a thing could be said to the main character of the novel. However, the princess did not want to talk about anything else, because when they both sat down on the sand next to the water,
The girl with red eyes admitted with a smile that she had long since begun to admire Rave, and Rave herself was listening attentively at that time. She had to laugh awkwardly to avoid looking weird when the princess said that Rave's very existence brought joy to everyone, which made the protagonist wonder if Ella herself should think of herself the same way as the novel's protagonist. It seemed that the princess was really sad, and this also made the pink-haired lady think sadly about the fact that it seemed that Ella was really sad, and now she did not fully understand what she wanted to say, talking about kindness. However, when they both sat in awkward silence, and Rave seemed to have forgotten that danger might be nearby, the killer suddenly appeared behind them, looking at the girls with a crazy look and already wanting to kidnap them as soon as possible. Rave quickly realized that her intuition had not failed her, and thanks to this, she was able to react quickly, hugging the princess and pushing her away from the enemy, thereby covering her from the blow, because the attacker wanted to swing his hand at Elle, but missed. The blow to the main character was so strong that the girl lost consciousness, and only the alarming voice of the princess, who called her from unconsciousness by name, made her wake up, open her eyes, and look forward in surprise, not believing what had happened. The worried, golden-haired princess looked at her friend with concern and real sadness, asking her how she was feeling, asking where it hurt, because from the blow she even lost consciousness and fell to the ground. The pink-haired lady wasn't as bad as Ella had worried and thought, so they were all soon sitting on the ground and asking each other about what had happened. Or rather, the worried lady was asking Ella if she was hurt and if everything was okay, while Rav was worried about the scratches on the princess's hands, realizing that the emperor would most likely kill her for allowing his daughter to get fucked. Elle herself noticed that they were not on the shore at all, but in a wooden barn, where only moonlight penetrated through the cracks. Looking at the dust, cobwebs in the corners and rotten daughters, the girl realized that it looked very much like an abandoned hut, and it seemed that they were very far from the capital, which frightened her even more. They both continued to sit on the cold floor, as Rave realized that their hair disguise had already disappeared, meaning that quite a bit of time had passed. Now she was left wondering when the guards would arrive and if they even knew where they were. Also realizing that the main character would most likely be saved soon, because she is the most important character in the novel, the girl wanted to look at the princess, but she had already moved away from her, which frightened Rave, because Elle was crawling somewhere to the side and wanted to do something. As it turned out, the princess wanted to find a way out of the old barn, so she moved a few boards, showing her friend a hole through which she could crawl, and Elle turned to Rave, saying that they could escape. The pink-haired lady, who definitely knew more because she knew the plot, approached Elle and said anxiously that they should probably stay here to wait for the emperor and help to arrive. But the princess was confident in her own, agorally, that it was better to go and run, because if evil people wanted to contact her father, it was all serious. The red-eyed girl turned to her friend and told her to trust her, because everything would be fine. But Rave still wasn't calm. She knew that this wouldn't lead to anything good, so she constantly doubted Elle's words. And when the protagonist had already agreed with the persistent princess, because of which they both slowly climbed out through the hole in the barn, and the princess held her hand and helped her get out, they were already being watched by a scary man who could do bad things. In front of them was a man with a scary smile, black hair and eyes, a commoner who leaned over them and tried to frighten them, saying that they would not be able to escape. But the two girls did not run away. They stood in place and looked at him in shock. The princess turned out to be brave, hiding Rave behind her back and telling the attacker that he would not be able to carry out any of his plans. And the heroine herself was afraid at this time, understanding that they needed to take a good look around before running. Thanks to the enemy's attitude, Rave realized that in front of them was not just a scoundrel, but a man from the faction that opposes the emperor, and he continued to intimidate them, saying that the emperor was already in danger, they needed to surrender, and hearing this, Elle became scared and asked the man what he meant. Her red eyes showed a real fear of losing the closest person in her life,
and she asked the attacker what he wanted to do with his father, and he only laughed in response. He scratched his neck and smiled at the children, because for him it was just a pleasant game before depriving the children of freedom and locking them up again. And so he said that in any case, her father would be bad, and he would no longer be able to return to the throne and even to his normal life. The blonde lady was only outraged by this, and began to order the attacker to immediately tell everything that happened to her dad, while the pink-haired lady behind her was only afraid, realizing that her friend was only provoking the scoundrel, and this, as expected, greatly angered the guy, who even stamped his foot on the wall of the barn and told the girls to immediately stop this meaningless conversation, and the princess and Rave shuddered and pressed closer to each other. In front of them was someone who could kill them at any moment, but continue to stand hunched over, telling them that they no longer needed to resist and that he would not repeat his own words several times. The attacker wanted to grab the princess by the wrist and take her back to the barn, saying that they no longer need to resist their own will. But this was prevented by Rave, who grabbed the guy by the hand and thereby surprised him, because the little girl ordered not to touch the princess. She looked at the attacker with eyes full of anger and indignation and ordered that the princess be released, saying that if she had even bruises or scratches, the emperor would definitely kill her. The lady was amazed at her friend's courage, but this did not stop the scoundrel, who held the aristocrat and said with a grin that they were quite daring and therefore would soon pay for it. He immediately grabbed the pink-haired girl by her clothes and pulled her closer to him, saying that she annoyed him the most, and the girl used this moment to hint to the princess to run away quickly while the guy was distracted by her. But the princess did not want to leave her friend and leave her in trouble. She only looked at everything that happened with a stern look. She understood that she needed to take a step towards freedom, to try to get out of a difficult situation on her own.
And so Elle picked up a stone from the ground, threw it towards the girl and the main character, intending to harm the attacker. But she didn't even come close to doing what she did, because the boulder hit Rave right in the forehead, which surprised the thief.
The pink-haired baby immediately fell to the floor from severe dizziness, which is why the scoundrel did not understand what to do for a minute, and the princess only understood that her attempt to save everyone only led to even greater difficulties. Feeling a large lump on her forehead that continued to grow, the main character lost consciousness and heard only the voice of the princess, who again called her by name. But the shocked heroine, like last time, was unable to remain conscious, realizing that all this was because of Elle. Rave never managed to shout to the princess to run away immediately, and Elle herself did not want to leave her close friend, which is why they both again found themselves in a dark place, where the heroine was already lying on the cold floor with her hands tied. But she was suddenly awakened by a strange voice, certainly not that of an intruder, for she also heard several heavy stomps of boots and the excited voice of one soldier, who shouted to the others that he had found the princess. And as soon as the heroine opened her eyes, she immediately realized that she was in a cramped box, where there was not even light, and her mouth was tied with some kind of rag, and she could only move her body, realizing that she needed to declare herself. The girl was even more surprised when she heard a familiar, irritating voice, and it turned out to be the emperor, who was already hugging the princess tightly and apologizing for his long absence. And Elle was only glad to see her dad safe and sound, even forgetting for a moment about Rave, who was in the box behind her. At that moment, the girl realized that the touching reunion of father and daughter seemed to have already ended according to the plot, and everyone should pay attention to her, which is why she moved the box, and the silent emperor looked at it. And a chill ran through the girl's body when the emperor only told his daughter in a rough voice to leave here as quickly as possible, although he clearly saw the moving box, and Ravenette was shocked, not understanding how else to declare herself if even the emperor was deliberately ignoring her. She was left all alone in a cramped wooden box when silence fell, and the emperor, along with his daughter and guards, decided to leave, forgetting about Rave, who had been next to Elle all this time and served with her life. The sky was bright from the moonlight, and the barn was in some forest where few would be able to find the girl. But Rave knew she was tired of being in unnecessary, secondary character. So she wanted to act, and as soon as the princess and the emperor and many others returned to the palace, the mountaineers met them and excitedly asked each one whether their beloved Princess Elle, about whom they had been worried all this time, had been found. Such wonderful news was reported to them by one guard, who also said that the emperor with his subordinates and daughter would soon appear in the mansion, and Raniel even fell to the ground from relief, admitting that this was the best news in her life. And another maid with red hair looked at the guard and asked him what happened to that girl who was constantly bullying the princess, and who was kidnapped along with Lady Elle. And when the guard confessed that the whole thing was true, she had not survived because there was no news of her, the Duke was also nearby, who with stunned eyes understood that something so terrible had happened that he could not even imagine. He refused to believe it, telling himself that it was impossible, even though the very thought of his girlfriend's death scared him more than anything else, and he immediately gathered himself to act, running towards the dead forest, hoping to find Rave there. The guy remembered the beautiful curls of the main character and realized that he had not appreciated her at all until this moment, because it seemed that he would no longer see that same girl who came to him herself, wanted to be friends with him out of a kind heart, and promised to show him true happiness. Even when Rave first appeared before him near the grave and under that very tree, he looked closely at her appearance and did not trust her, thinking that she was definitely a spy of the emperor who was sent to spy on him. But on the same day, he realized that she had enchanted him with her own magical hair color. Even though he was silent, he still looked at her. He understood that he had never seen such a girl before, and while he did not hope to see her again, then everything changed because Rave turned out to be a more important person for him than just a spy. But he was incredibly surprised by the fact that the pink-haired girl seemed to be walking away from him again and again, holding a book in her hands and waving goodbye to the boy. And then the Duke did not even suspect that their seemingly random meetings happened again and again. He remembers very well how he didn't like the presence of the main character, and constantly wanted the girl to leave him alone as soon as possible. For example, when they both went to the clearing of magic flowers, and when the happy girl was only happy to spend time with the Duke, and because of this, he felt incredibly painful. It became even more painful for him at that moment when he seemed to have found himself in that very warm moment in his life, when the heroine was sitting next to him on the bed and was interested in his opinion, also talking about the sea. But he was reading a book and looked very busy. Then he already knew that in front of him was not just a beautiful girl with bright eyes and hair, but also a beautiful soul wave who was kind to him for no reason and only wanted to tell him about her dreams, about how she wanted to travel the ocean or the sea. It seemed that there was the same sparkle and even admiration in his eyes when he held the book in his hands, and understood that he did not want to lose such a person, but wanted to see Rave smile, listen to her stories, and get to know her further. He remembers that the girl left those same books on the table next to the window in the vase with the magic flower, recalling that then he first thought about what kind of future she was talking about, and therefore he understood that the girl's faith and her hope greatly surprised him. And now, when he sincerely hopes that Rave simply remained in the magical meadow among the flowers, he began to peer closely at each flower, each tree, but did not see Rave. However, this does not make him believe that she died. As it turned out, the boy did not want to find the girl, but to find someone else, so he began to shout that he knew that all the spies were located here, watching every member of the Emperor's palace, and he wanted to start a conversation with them. He looked ahead with full confidence and determination, and knew that there were spies here. They were listening to his words, because the boy only asked to be taken to the Emperor at that very second, because he had a request for him. And while the Duke was already planning to act on a larger scale and more menacingly, the main character did not even suspect that they wanted to find her as soon as possible, because she was in a dark forest where there were only high mountains, wild forests and moonlight, the good light of which she was walking. With every step she took, it became more and more difficult for her to walk, and she also looked at her own hands, tied with a rope, which were already scratched and bruised, but she managed to untie them and free herself in a calm environment. She looked at her palms and remembered with bewilderment that earlier she had to hit the wall of the box hard in order to fall to the floor and thereby break the box, get out, and then go on, although she does not know where exactly to go to get to the palace. However, remembering the palace, the girl realized that returning to such a place after such terrible events was humiliating for her, and for now she needed to rest, but she did not suspect that someone was already standing behind her with a bow and in light clothes. Turning her head in the direction of the noise, the girl was a little scared, but realized that in front of her was a woman and a man who were hunters, and looked at the girl with curiosity, not intending to harm and admitting that they had not seen her here before. Rave immediately understood that the adult hunters were worried about her and that she needed to do everything to get them to help her. So she made a pitiful mid and looked at them sweetly, saying that she was playing with her mother and accidentally got lost and didn't know where to go back. And it worked, so the woman and the guy looked at her with charm and affection, saying that she was a real poor thing, and the pink-haired lady meanwhile continued to play, like he was looking for parents, but she never managed to find them. The adults immediately wanted to help the little girl, and the lady even took the baby by the hand, smilingly telling her that for now she would be able to spend the night with them and have a delicious dinner, which the lady was happy about, and thanked the kind hunters. But the heroine knew that as soon as she felt better, she would run away, and after that, the main character found herself in a circle of kind hunters who gathered around the fire and gave the baby soup, which she ate with great pleasure, which others admired and rejoiced at Rave's health. Rave even thought about how she could escape if she fit in well with the new company, which she even liked a little. But suddenly, the woman's hand touched the baby's wounded cheek, and she admitted that she hadn't noticed her wound because of the darkness. But now she realized that perhaps she had been through a lot, and when the woman told the little girl that at dawn they would go to the city to find medicine and heal her wounds, the little girl smiled and thanked everyone, thinking that nothing terrible would happen if she rested a little, and the huntress's hand at that time stroked the top of Ray's head. Others also smiled at her and said that it seemed she was very tired, and therefore they would prepare her own place in their house. And the girl next to the guy was touched by the heroine and said that she was a real angel, while the fire was still burning near them. But suddenly, when the girl was thinking about the fact that she had previously eaten a magic flower on purpose to avoid poisoning herself, she was shocked to feel a strange feeling as if she was losing consciousness, and her body was getting weaker with each passing minute. Feeling helpless, she was about to fall to the ground, but a certain man immediately caught her with his hands and began to smile slyly, as if the heroine had just fallen into their insidious plan, already sitting on the ground in a circle of people who were not really kind to her. The girl sadly understood that she should not have trusted these people, but she could no longer resist due to the loss of consciousness. And while something more serious was happening to the protagonist than what had happened before, equally important things were happening in the Emperor's castle, even in the dead of night, when not a single light was on in the palace window. The Emperor looked at the one who had come to him with a sly and insidious smile, asking what could have happened that the Duke himself, who had previously been declared dead by some, had come to him. And when the one who was kneeling before him was silent and collecting all his thoughts, the Emperor told his interlocutor not to drag out the conversation, because this is what he likes the least. The little boy with red eyes was surrounded by guards, but he only looked at the Emperor and said that if he was so cruel and wanted complete power, he was ready to fulfill his role, which he wanted to see. And as soon as the Emperor asked the boy with the same smile what he meant, the red-eyed boy angrily said that he was ready to die, and therefore wanted the ruler to personally send him to war, and he also said that if he could prove his loyalty, he would definitely find the one who dared to kidnap the princess. Meanwhile, the main character was already in the strange, dark house of her kidnappers, who were looking at the table with a bowl and herbs, asking their friend if they noticed something strange when their victim lost consciousness. The woman and the boy were talking about whether the sleeping pill they gave the child was too strong, because now the lady was lying in bed and did not wake up even after a while. But he replied that it was a trifle, because if she could not kidnap the princess, then they should definitely keep this girl. And when the adults talked about how, if the heroine was a spy, they should kill her immediately, the heroine herself only pretended to be asleep, when in fact she listened to their words and was horrified, because she could run into those who were in cahoots with the kidnappers. In the end, they decided to leave the room, admitting that they did not like the emperor, and it would be better if that same crown prince were alive, and the heroine only had to squeeze the blanket into her fist, because she knows the truth, and that in fact the Duke is alive and everything can change. As soon as they left, the girl immediately got up from the bed and realized that people really hated the emperor more than anyone else, which surprised her, because previously the opinions of those around her were inaccessible to her.
She thought that she could cooperate with these people if they were normal, and she also went to the table with herbs and said that she knew its name, and if the kidnappers made a sleeping pill from it, she could neutralize it with the help of a magic flower.
The kidnappers had no idea that the girl they had managed to catch was not so stupid, because she was already taking out the rapier flowers from her secret pocket in her dress, intending to make an antidote to the sleeping pill, and she took several flowers out of the red bag into her palm, realizing that they were not suitable for the experiment, because after such a long time in the bag, they had dried out and lost all their properties and usefulness. But suddenly, when the girl was wondering why she had woken up at all, if, as it turned out, the sleeping pill had worked at full strength, that same green bottle flew into her room, which the lady was surprised by, realizing that she had already seen it somewhere. It was this butterfly that allowed her to pay attention to the window, in which Rave saw the inhabitants of the house, with a shocked face, realizing that she had to take the chance and run. And for now, she was obliged to pretend to be asleep. Rave went to bed with sad thoughts that no one was waiting for her in the palace, and then her escape would be pointless, and sad thoughts made her come to the conclusion that she didn't even want to return to the imperial castle. But as soon as she remembered the meaning of returning, a sweet image of the same boy who helped the heroine and is her true friend appeared in her memories. She smiled for a moment, and then wondered if she should go away and start a new life, if in that seemingly bad place, where everyone only required her to do the job of a taster and try poisoned dishes. There was such a valuable person as the Duke, whom she promised to make happy. 3 days had passed since the girl had entered the bright house and become a hostage in it. But only in appearance did it seem harmless, even good, because its shadow seemed much darker, as did what was said in the house itself. The girl remembered a certain imperial knight who had fled from endless campaigns in the name of the emperor, and realized that all these warriors were expelled only because of the emperor's endless campaigns, between which there is not even a rest, because the ruler does not spare anyone. The city also dealt with all sorts of artisans, one of whom the girl imagined with a moustache and blonde hair, because one day, if the emperor's princess even tripped over their products, he would immediately kick them out of the empire. And the girl, realizing that there are a lot of secondary characters here who are against the emperor, the girl put her hand to the window glass and realized that she needed to get out, because right now the guards were patrolling the opposite part of the village. That's why she decided to open the window right away to escape through it, realizing that she had already placed a pillow under the blanket so that it would seem as if she was still lying there, although she was already standing on the windowsill and looking out onto the street. But the girl could not have imagined that at that very moment a woman would enter her room, who asked another guy if he heard the noise, and while she was rubbing her eyes, the frozen heroine already understood that everything was not going according to plan. But when the girl looked at the room, she realized that she no longer saw the girl in it, but only an open window, calmly deciding that it needed to be closed, and so far nothing surprised her. The thing is that at night, when the woman was already checking the room, the little girl managed to jump down and hide under the window, not understanding why the inspector decided to wake up right now. And when the girl froze, praying that the same woman would not come to the bed and check her, she clearly heard the steps of the checker towards her bed and already asked the little girl if she was asleep, thinking that she was in bed, which stunned the girl. Immediately after this, the woman shouted throughout the house that their girl had run away, and Rave realized that she needed to run, which is why she ran as fast as she could away from the house, and, with tears on her face, tried to quickly disappear from sight. She continued to run, her pink curls fluttering in the wind, and the lady herself wondered if she would be able to escape, because she did not know the way at all, but simply went where she looked. Seeing not only a dense forest in front of her, but also high mountains behind them, the girl quickly realized that she could hide in that forest, especially when visibility was very poor at night, and that group would have to inspect every bush with flashlights. As expected, 2 guys and a woman immediately appeared in the forest, walking along the paths and strictly ordering each other to quickly check every tree, place, or bush, because the baby could be hiding there. And in such a short time, the heroine was really able to hide under some tree, trying not to even breathe so as not to make unnecessary sounds, while the kidnappers were talking about how that girl was definitely a spy, because even a good sleeping pill didn't work on her. When the girl sincerely did not know what to do next, because she needed to run, but her every movement could give away her location, a magical green butterfly appeared next to her, circling nearby. But Rave still did not understand why it appeared precisely at the most difficult moments, and when the lady felt that this butterfly was calling her to follow it, but she did not dare to move, suddenly an evil guy appeared above her, who with a smile told everyone that he had found the girl, and the protagonist understood with shock that everything was over. She looked at him with fear when the guy, with a laugh and a smile on his face, told her that she was good at playing hide-and-seek, but she would have to accept defeat, because once again they were able to outsmart her and find her. The guy got angry, intending not only to threaten the little girl, but also to punish her with the torch, which he pointed straight at her, as if he was going to burn her. And out of fear, the pink lady screamed, begging him to stop. However, he never managed to accomplish what he had planned, because when the guy was about to lower the torch to the heroine, and the protagonist covered herself with her hands, suddenly a sword cut through the kidnapper's body, and the frightened and trembling guy realized that he had been pierced through and through. And when the heroine raised her eyes, she noticed a determined duke, firmly confident in his actions, who was holding a sword in his hands and looked like a warrior in dark robes, which surprised the astonished girl. The stunned lady looked at him with shock and asked how he got there, but the black-haired guy did not answer the little girl's question, only looking at her and asking if she wanted to know his name earlier, and he introduced himself as Calix Benoit Trishan, looking at her with kind, red, and joy-filled eyes, because the worst for the heroine was left behind, and the heroine was safe, even almost unharmed. He would have continued to smile at Rave, but suddenly the girl wanted to pounce on him and hug him so tightly that the guy was amazed, hugging her back, because the girl could not believe in such happiness, and that she managed to meet him, and that she was really needed. The girl could not have imagined that one day the same thing would happen to her as to the princess, who was found by her father and who was reunited with him with hugs and tears. And now she tightly hugs the person dear to her, crying and laughing with happiness at the same time. Rave told Calix that he was late, but still, hell be damned for his coming. And so now the couple was looking at each other sweetly. The protagonist was paying, and the Duke only smiled, glad that they were still together. And after some time, the rude heroine already saw that all the guilty, her kidnappers, were tied up, and the Imperial Knights were taking them into custody, showing them to move faster, and the criminals themselves did not even think that they could fall into the trap of the Emperor himself. The girl also looked at the Imperial Knight Eden, who was also in the ranks of the soldiers, and greeted the girl, saying that he immediately rushed to save her as soon as he learned that she was kidnapped, and next to him was Calix, who listened to the warrior's words with an angry face. Calix continued to be angry, looking at Eden as if he didn't like his presence too much, while the pink-haired lady responded to her friend with a smile, saying that she was very grateful to him, and thanks to their support, she didn't even get hurt, got off with a slight fright. When a strange dried leaf ended up on the top of the main character's head and got tangled in her hair, Calix walked up to the main character and called her by name with a smile, also removing the leaf from her hair. But Rave was surprised, not understanding why the guy called her by name. She was confused and asked the guy with anxiety what happened, but when he showed her with a serious face that same red leaf that was previously on her head. But he also said that she should not be surprised that he called her by name, because he also introduced himself to her as Calix. The girl was surprised by such a close relationship with the Duke, because earlier he did not even talk to her and was quite withdrawn, and she even assumed that he was jealous of her for Eden. And Eden himself laughed behind them, uncertainly said that he just came here to patrol. She tried to calm Calix down and tell him that he shouldn't worry, because she considers him her only best friend. But the guy just looked away and said that she can call him not a friend, but just by his name. This struck the girl so much that she immediately began to think with her lips slightly open. But for her it was far from sad, but on the contrary, incredibly joyful, because now the Duke had revealed himself to her from a new side, closer and better. That's why she laughed, Agura, like of course she will call him by his name from this very moment, and the happy lady even repeated the name of Calix, as if her soul was filled with joy and fun, because now all the problems are behind her. And so ended the warm meeting of the heroine not only with Calix, but also with the Imperial Knights, after which they decided to spend the night in the same forest, and at dawn to begin moving towards the palace in order to return. But for now the night was so dark that only the stars were visible in the sky. After some time, Calix was able to make a fire and sat down next to it, looking at the flames and chatting about something of his own, until Rave came to him and addressed him by name to talk. The pink-haired girl sat down next to the Duke and began to closely examine his clothes, asking how he could get here, because he was wearing a warrior's uniform, while Calix himself was silent and was about to add wood to the fire. The lady even asked if something had happened between him and the Emperor, because that was what worried her the most, and it was easy enough to guess. But the red-eyed guy hadn't spoken yet, intending to explain everything to the girl without upsetting her. And when Calix took a certain thing in his hand, showing it to the pink-haired girl, he admitted that he had only done what she said, clarifying that he had previously told the Emperor that he was going to war. As it turned out, Calix showed her the very note that the protagonist had previously left for him in the books that she asked the guy to read, and he also said that he not only took the note, but now he wanted to hear the whole truth, imagining the document that a person signs before participating in military operations. The lady remembered that in the note she personally asked the guy to become a warrior and go to war, because this is the only way for him to survive, and now the Duke wants to know why war should save him. Remembering from the novel that this would be a big war that would rage for more than 10 years, the lady realized that there would be many casualties, and many soldiers would lose their lives. But for Calix, the war had a different fate in store. The girl told the Duke that soon this campaign would be led by the famous Duke of Vitsliberia, with snow-white hair and dark clothes, and this would already be a plus for Calix, because according to the lady, he could get support from him. The red-eyed boy looked at her very carefully and seemed to be listening to the commander of the army, because the words of the seemingly little girl were wise and quite real. If Duke Vishalaberry really led the campaign, and this could be used. And when Calix only asked why the girl thought that her family was somehow connected with Vishalaberry, she imagined in her head a yellow gemstone, telling that in the northern lands belonging to Calix's family, there is Armentium, which Vishalaberry would really need because he had been looking for it for many years. The girl remembered that in the original, the princess found this stone, but if they could find it earlier, nothing bad would happen, and the lady told Calix to definitely use this stone in order to make friends with the Duke, and the guy was amazed. And the lady was also surprised that after a detailed story, and it seemed a good plan, the black-haired guy only bowed his head down and said that it was unlikely to work, and the green-haired lady looked at him and silently watched his reaction. She decided to support him, looking at the fire and telling him with a smile that while spending time here, she realized that people live here who really don't trust the Emperor and even hate him. They all probably want to live better and rush to him. Rave imagined a happy couple, telling them that despite the evil Emperor and the situation in the Empire, there are people living there who happily wait for a good day and rejoice in the light, hugging each other and hoping for the best. And now the girl put her hand on Calix's palm, looking at him with a smile and sincerely saying that they can be as strong and happy as those people who, even in such a harsh time, seek peace and love. What surprised Calix even more was that the happy pink-haired girl in front of him laughed, saying that after all the difficulties, they were still able to go to the sea and start traveling, just like in books about pirates or in novels. This really made Calix calm down and look at the sweet little girl with hope that everything will be different. They will be able to defeat the true evil, and most importantly, he will continue to enjoy her smile, shiny hair, and words about good things. The heroine managed to convince Calix, and they hugged, laughed, and the guy fixed her hair when both said that they would do everything possible to be happy. And Rave managed to fulfill her main oath before the Duke. Only after such a conversation did the previously doubting heroine understand that she would not be able to escape from the palace just because of Calix, intending to be with him further. And in the morning, the lady, along with others, had already arrived at the imperial palace when everyone was waiting for their return. When the pink-haired lady realized that she would not be able to hide from the Emperor, she appeared before the astonished princess and knelt before her in order to sincerely apologize for what happened, which is why Elle, who saw her friend, even cried. Rave realized that if she couldn't escape from the palace, she would be able to fit in perfectly and be a part of it. And now she looked resolutely at the princess and apologized for not being able to protect her from great danger. But a few hours before this, when the main character was still in the forest and everyone was just getting ready to head out to the Emperor, preparing a carriage with horses, she was already sitting in the transport with Calix. The girl sat quietly in her place and looked out the window before starting the journey, telling Calix that she had finally decided to tell everyone that she had tried to protect the princess and also to make sure that she was treated the way she deserved. And the red-eyed guy with folded hands looked at his friend and listened to her attentively, even when the sad heroine admitted that this was all just to survive in the palace so that the Emperor would not kill her. But the lady looked at Calix in surprise when, after a few minutes of silence, he simply quietly asked if they couldn't just run away from the Emperor somewhere far away and forget about him forever. A black-haired boy in dark clothes sat opposite her and said that even if the princess, who really loved her, forgave her, the Emperor's attitude towards her would definitely not change, and he would remain angry with everyone, distrustful and cruel. He continued to sit stiffly, looking down and confessing to the heroine that he did not have such good plans for the future, because he was afraid that his girlfriend would never get what she was counting on. Or rather, even a simple forgiveness from the Emperor was practically impossible. The guy was even more worried about something completely different, and then he looked at the pink-haired, sad little girl with sad eyes, saying that he was afraid that if she went to war soon, she would be left alone, like a me in a cage with hungry tigers, where everyone wanted to take her life. Calix even told the girl that if only she asked, he could take her away from the Emperor as far as possible, and this made the girl smile, who understood that he cared about her, but still imagined the ruler's dark castle and explained that they still would not be able to completely disappear from this place.
After that, the heroine fell silent, looking at her partner with deep thoughts, and the two of them understood that cruel, difficult difficulties awaited them, but the very presence of Calix near her makes the heroine worry less.
She looked at him with sincerity and motivation, wanting to encourage him and thanking him for his kindness, saying that they should still return and stay in the imperial palace, at least for each other's sake. And the black-haired boy remained silent, looking at the girl, who also admitted that she absolutely did not care whether her efforts were recognized or not, because she only wanted to see the result. However, she also said with a warm smile that if this were to happen, She would do everything to find another way to show others her persistence, and she also gestured with her hands and looked exactly like an angel in the guy's eyes. The girl tried to calm Calix down by saying that even if she returned to the Imperial Palace now, everything would not be the same as before, and she decided to completely change her life. Which made the boy smile for a moment, who admitted that she was right, because now was not the time to dwell on worries, and the heroine, meanwhile, looked out the window and saw something. The fact is that they saw the Imperial Palace from the carriage window, which was already visible from behind the wooded area, and they both thought that now they needed to find the strength in themselves to protect themselves. And this was also perfectly understood by Calix, who already wanted to take his great sword in his hands, thinking about his own strength, because in this case he would need to become much more confident, stronger, all in order to protect not only himself, but also Rave, first of all. Taking a cold weapon with him, the boy with red, beautiful eyes looked at the lady and said that they should go out already, and he also confessed that he wanted Rave to take more books next time so that they could read them together. This surprised the girl so much that she didn't even move from her place, looking at the boy with big green eyes, because it seemed like her dream had just come true, because the Duke had finally heard her and became interested in the little girl's hobby. She laughed and blushed slightly with embarrassment, telling the boy that she would bring him a whole mountain of books so that they could become interested in encyclopedias and travel together. And while the main character and Calix were approaching the Imperial Palace, something interesting was also happening in the castle itself, because an incredibly beautiful yellow bird flew to one aristocrat, who brought with him a piece of paper with news. The princess took such a small piece of paper from the bird and read it. Immediately after that, she shouted in shock the name of one of the maids, Raniel, and the lady with blue hair turned around at the sound. Having been doing business with her partner in a certain gift before that, she already understood that she needed to go to Elle. However, she didn't even need to go, because the red-eyed princess was already running towards her as if she had received the most important and joyful news in the world, waving her hand with a piece of paper and smilingly shouting for Raniel to look at this thing she had. She was so happy that she ran with heavy breathing and shouted to the maid that Rev, her beloved friend, was already returning to her in the palace, and very soon they could meet. For Elle, it was not just joy, but something more significant, because she pressed even a small piece of paper to her cleavage and could already cry, because earlier the very thought of Rave's death frightened her the most. She also recalled the events of that very terrible war, when together with Rave, she met the kidnapper and tried to save her friend. However, throwing a stone, she hit the heroine right in the face, which made her even more scared because she could kill her at that moment. She remembers that only because of that stone that hit the heroine in the forehead, she saw a lot of blood. So much that the princess had never seen anything like it, even in her worst nightmares. And when she found herself in the palace and read the latest news with the maids, she learned that Rave was still alive, but the fear still did not go away. The thing is, the red-eyed, golden-haired girl was worried about whether Rave would hate her after such a terrible incident, and it was quite possible that their relationship would worsen and never recover. The princess, it turned out, was afraid that Rave would accuse her of something, because the blow with the stone was very strong. But now, when the heroine was in front of her, and Elle was crying, the pink-haired lady first of all apologized to the aristocrat, and the determined Rave looked at the princess, still sitting on her knees in front of her, saying that it was all her fault, because she could not protect her from danger. It seemed that this either pleased or surprised the princess so much that a fleeting smile appeared on her sweet, charming face, because she realized that this time Rave was definitely living for her. But after that, the princess fell on her knees in front of her in the same way, saying that this was real nonsense and that she was unable to protect her, and Elle also asked Rave to get up quickly. Weld would not allow her friend to be in an awkward position, understanding perfectly well that Rave absolutely did not wish her any harm and did not want to hurt her. The girl touched the heroine's face with her hands, and said that no matter what others said, she would consider her saviour, thanks to whom she remained alive at all. And while the girls were crying and confessing their eternal friendship to each other, there were others standing nearby who were only happy to see the warm reunion of their girlfriends, and it seemed that even the horse was happy about it, smiling sweetly. When many mountaineers had already gathered around them, the princess, who was watching this lovely scene perfectly, happily decided to inform Rave that she had a gift for her, which she asked Raniel to bring. Raniel carried out Elle's order, and in front of the surprised lady there was a rather large box with something, which was opened right in front of her, and the protagonist already saw something similar to a collar in it. It seems to be clothing. And the princess opened the blue gift box with a smile, and politely asking her friend if she wanted to become her personal servant in the palace, which amazed the little girl. Rave looked at the blue uniform that had been specially made for her, which was perfectly clean and flawless, when Ella continued to speak, saying that she had even spoken about this topic with her strict father, and that this idea did not anger him, quite the contrary. The princess said that she had spoken with her father, and that it was Rave who was forgiven and left in the palace. And the pink-haired lady was so amazed by this that she looked at the form with her mouth open and could not believe her eyes. For the protagonist, this was big news, because from now on she could no longer eat poisoned dishes every day and endure the hard work of a taster, because now she would have a safe job as a servant, which is what the princess told her. And the lady accepted this gift with honour, taking the box in her hands, realizing that her most important problem had been solved as if with the snap of a finger. She, with her head down, was already preparing to thank the princess for such help with all her heart. She bowed to the princess and even shouted that she was incredibly grateful to her and would serve her with all her heart, even more devotedly and decisively. And Raniel looked at this picture along with another servant. Princess Elle smiled again with satisfaction, thinking to herself that she was an incredibly generous and merciful princess, accepting words of gratitude from her friend and already believing that others saw her true intentions. However, when she only heard the words of the maids nearby, not even about her, but only about Rev, saying that she was a truly great girl, because she protected the princess and wanted to give her life for her, all her joy was destroyed, and the red-eyed girl again realized that everyone again saw only Rave. They talked about how the princess didn't suffer at all thanks to that very heroine, who is now considered a real idol for many and an example. And also from the tea party, they realized that she was special and not like the others. At that moment, she seemed to be alone in a grey space where she looked only into the distance, when everyone around her only said that Rava was worthy of admiration and respect. She clutched the train of her dress, realizing that it was she who had saved the life of Rave, who had previously been almost a slave in her palace and would now be a full-fledged maid. But everyone around her still only talked about her, but not about the princess. Not only anxiety woke up in her, but also despair, sadness, a feeling of complete injustice and confusion, and the thought constantly swirled in her head. Why is everyone looking only at Rave? But she was forced to come to reality by the pink-haired lady herself, who was holding a box with a uniform in her hands, and bowed again, saying that she was asking to let her go, because it was time for lunch. The princess's heart is very sincere and kind, with a smile, and for the third time she thanks the princess for her kindness, because now everything will be better, completely different. And the golden-haired lady looked not with silent, quiet shock, trying to calm herself down only by the fact that it seemed that she was forcing herself to worry more and more. And all this was for nothing, and in reality, everything was not so. Having reassured herself with the conviction that everyone around her admired her anyway, and she had nothing to worry about, she waved her hand to her friend with a smile and saw her off with the maid, Raniel. Saw them off to lunch. The princess was left alone with her thoughts as the wind blew through her pink dress, wondering what she should do when the maids were already around her, and asking the aristocrat what she wanted for lunch, mango salad or chocolate cake. She decided to come to her senses with utmost confidence that everyone around her would still admire her, and all the attention would be to her. She was even sure of that. But after a while, when she saw from the balcony that the maid admired Rave and gave her compliments, she would hear something terrible from the maid. The thing is that the maid enthusiastically told Rave that she really had become an idol and a hero for her, and these words upset the princess so much that watching this from the balcony, she felt horror and only confirmation that everyone admired only Rave. And before that, when the main character decided to become a mountain woman and her life changed a lot, the girl was already entering her new room. Her legs were visible on the threshold because the lady was looking at the new apartments. Because the pink-haired girl couldn't even enter the beautiful room with rich furniture and luxurious renovations, not believing that it was her room, when Raniel was next to her and smilingly said that now she would live here, and the pro-anti. The girl realized that they even began to treat her much better, not like before, and then the lady received more delicious food, lay in a large soft bed all day, and enjoyed rest. But suddenly, when the girl was resting, there was a knock on her room. Opening the door slightly, Rave saw a cook and a blonde lady in front of her, who immediately greeted her, and thus surprised the little girl, after which people asked her if the heroine could help them. Rave finally realized that her reputation had changed significantly and become much better, because even unknown people like them asked the little girl to help them, although they were shy, and the guy with folded hands was not at all confident in his actions. And after a while, the heroine realized that rumors had spread around the palace that she was a capable girl with intelligence and talent, which is why she was already surrounded by many people who asked her, for example, to wash dishes, change the water in a vase, help with something in the laundry. The girl continued to be in the luxurious and large imperial palace with sharp roofs and towers, sometimes becoming indignant at requests for help, because all these people know perfectly well that she is now on forced leave, but they still want the little girl to help them with their business. And one day, the girl who was on the terrace threw a bag on the floor in anger, shouting that the princess herself gave her this weekend, but she still has to carry out a bunch of assignments from people who saw a capable person in her. The lady was clutching the same rag in her hand, gritting her teeth in anger, and realizing that if they all thought that she had previously been just a worthless taster, and therefore could be used, Rave realized that she wanted to teach them a good lesson.
In the end, the heroine had to calm down and understand that she would still do what she was told, so with a heavy sigh, she continued to wipe the surface with rags when the maid appeared behind her.
And when that same lady wanted to pass by, it seems he made an awkward movement, and because of this, right in front of the main character, some boxes with bows, very similar to gifts, fell to the floor with a crash. The pink-haired lady was so startled by the sudden noise that she leaned back, looking at the maid with confusion, and she also covered her face with her hands in shock and shame, while they both remained silent, and the protagonist did not understand what happened. As it turned out, the maid dropped everything she was carrying in her hands because she was staring at Rave's hair and pointing her finger at it, stunned, saying that it turns out she was the one who saved the princess from death. In front of the girl, there really was a girl with a charming face, green, large eyes, and pink hair, shiny and unique, and the girl herself was only holding a rag in her hands and looking at the maid with no less surprise. The heroine was even more surprised by the fact that the maid began to smile sweetly at her and touch her hands, admitting that she had long wanted to meet her and talk in person. And Rave did not even know what to say, surprised by the maid's behavior. She also confessed to the protagonist that she is her idol, because she could not have previously thought that she was so sweet and charming. But then the lady remembered about the boxes, trying to lift them with apologies, and Rave helped her, thinking that together they would manage faster. But even now, the lady did not stop looking at Rave and told her that she was really very kind, which she admired, and the green-eyed heroine only smiled awkwardly, thinking that in fact this was all in order to end everything. And when the maid took all her boxes and smiled at the little girl, wishing her a good day as a farewell, the amazed pink-haired lady looked at her, and suddenly realized that she had not heard such warm words from someone for a long time. Inspired and motivated by the words that every day could be as good as today, the lady took a candy out of her pocket and ate it, looking angrily ahead and already preparing to make every day brighter and better. Joyful Rave raised her hands up and shouted that if the people around her loved her and constantly asked for help, they would definitely recognize her, and she should be happy about it. But she didn't even think that at that time the princess on the balcony was looking at her. It seems that Ella was not even close to being happy about her friend's motivation and the fact that everyone around her loved and admired her, because when the main character cheerfully told herself that she would succeed, the princess was silent, looking at what was happening with mute shock when everything in her soul was collapsing and hurting. And she remained silent even when Michelle and her best friend were behind her, already wondering why the princess had started looking at something and being silent, and she was the one who asked Elle what had happened. In order not to show it, the golden-haired lady smiled, turned to them, and said that everything was fine. Although in fact sadness had long settled in her soul, she did not know how to look better against the background of Rave, who was admired by everyone. And while the princess was spending time with her friends, explaining to them that she just wanted to get some fresh air, but the bright sun blinded her again, Rava was in one kitchen where there was a bright interior, high windows, and frequency. The fact is that the girl had already been doing her job without question and putting the necessary boxes in their places, and even responded to another maid's request to sweep the corridor, because the heroine wanted to be completely useful in the palace. From that day on, the lady officially began working as a maid, and she seemed to like this job much more, because the tasks were simple and her life was safe, unlike working as a taster. And now she was diligently sweeping the floor from dirt and dust. The girl swept and allowed herself to think that even after changing jobs, her assignments had not changed in general, although now she would definitely not try poisoned food. And she already wanted to enter one room, opened the door slightly, and said to herself that after work she would need to go to the kitchen and check the products. But at that moment, it seemed, someone appeared behind her. When the girl turned around, she was not very surprised, because she noticed a nice woman with golden hair who put her hand on the top of her head and asked if it was hard for her to cope with all this. The lady addressed her as Miss Tyrant, saying that it was not at all difficult for her to do everything, and while the little girl was surprised that the woman was stroking her head, the new acquaintance began to look at her intently, which embarrassed the girl, and the heroine became curious when Miss Tyrant put her hand on her shoulder and said that if she would help her with something, she could save her from work after lunch, and such an offer could not fail to interest the little girl. The woman smiled at her and said that her role would not be difficult and that she would only need to spend an hour with her, and the pink-haired girl became even more interested, asking what she meant. And Tyrant said that since the princess would be returning late today, she urgently needed a model to try on a dress in honor of the upcoming diplomatic meeting. And Rave had chosen her as an assistant, since the necessary outfits were already hanging in her office. When the girl willingly agreed to the designer's proposal and tried on a golden-hued wig in order to look as much like Elle as possible, Tyrant looked at her with obvious surprise, even delight, and all because in front of her was Rave, who was incredibly similar to the princess. One can even mistakenly assume that she is her sister, but the only thing that distinguishes her from the real Elle is the color of her eyes. Noticing the strange expression on the designer's face, who was actually just amazed by her assistant, Rave became embarrassed and touched the wig, asking if she had put it on correctly, since she thought it was all about it. Miss Tyrant couldn't help but look at the little girl with a smile, saying that she had put her wig on a little crookedly, but that it could be easily fixed, and so the smiling lady asked the heroine to come up to her or sit on a chair. The girl was already moving Rave's blue chair, and the protagonist was only too happy to help, burning with the fact that she wanted to see the designer's efforts on herself as soon as possible, and thus help her. With every movement of Miss Tyrant's hand, with which she adjusted her pricket rave, the hairstyle became more and more alive and real, more like Elle's hair, and she also admitted to the heroine that this hair color suits her very well. and the little girl, sitting in front of the mirror, asked Miss in surprise if she really looked good with such hair, to which the designer answered her with a warm smile, stroking her head, saying that it seemed to her that any hair colour suited her. After that, Miss Tarrant was distracted for a moment and went to the side, telling the heroine that she had to bring something for her. And Rave said with a smile that he would wait for her, and she herself looked at what was lying on the table and interested her more. The thing is that she noticed not a sheet of paper with text, but drawings of the princess, which completely conveyed her appearance, and next to some details of the appearance, comments were added, which is why the lady thought that this was a sketch of a dress. Taking one sketch in her hands, the girl realized that she had seen such a dress design somewhere before, and she also asked the designer if she sewed dresses for the princess herself, which surprised Tarrant a little, looking at the heroine. The designer approached the girl and admitted that the sketch was just a rough draft, and it looked terrible, which made Rave look at her in surprise and say that it was completely wrong, and that she could see talent and beauty in the drawing. The amazed lady looked at the miss more closely and realized that in front of her was not just a designer, but a famous character from a novel, whom she was able to remember thanks to a cute story. And when the designer confessed that she had dreamed of sewing dresses for the princess since childhood, the girl understood why the sketch seemed familiar to her, because in front of her was that very lady, Ella's personal tailor, who in the future would dictate her fashion rules for the entire empire. Now, holding one of Tyrant'S works in her hands, the girl remembered, thanks to the novel, that the miss was so grateful to the princess for fulfilling her dream that she vowed to sew dresses only for her. And now Rave remembers that back then, reading the novel, she admired this. The heroine meant that it was strange for her to dedicate such a broad and great talent to just one person. And so she asked Tyrant if she wanted to open her own studio, which made the miss look at her in surprise. Miss answered that of course she wanted to open her own clothing store, and Rave only encouraged her, saying that even if she didn't have the means now, she should achieve such a goal, because many people would admire her, and Tyrant just remained silent. And the heroine did not expect at all that the designer would admit that she wanted to sew a dress for her first and foremost, which surprised Rave, saying that it was too great an honour for her, and Miss smiled, saying that she dreams of seeing every person in her outfits. When various tools for the work of the Master Tyrant were lying on the table, the designer herself told the girl that if she ever opens her own studio, she hopes that her first client will be her, which made Rave even happier. As the work continued, the girl wore a golden wig and looked at herself in the mirror as Tyrant tried on different clothes, and she herself thought about how Calix would look if he were dressed in the clothes Miss had sewn. She imagined herself as an adult, sitting at the table, with an also grown-up Calix standing next to her, already dreaming of wearing beautiful things in the future, living peacefully, following the call of his heart. The girl looked out the window and realized that she really pined for the red-eyed guy, wanted to visit him again, and also wanted to know how he was doing and what he was doing now. The lady quickly realized that she had an opportunity to visit the Duke, and so a few days later she decided to go to his abandoned castle, when the sunset was already outside, decorating the ground and the building with a reddish-gold colour. As it turned out, the boy had not been sitting still all this time and looking out the window with senselessness, because he had been outside and training hard, trying to become better at sword fighting, if he had joined the ranks of the knights, and would soon go to war. In his hands was a heavy steel sword, sharp and dangerous, but he had already learned to swing it so powerfully and deftly that it seemed that with one blow an adult opponent could fall to the ground. All his training was interrupted when the main character appeared from behind the forest thicket, smiling and waving with joy, admitting that she had finally found him. Holding a basket with some goodies in her hands, the protagonist came closer to her friend and confessed that he had grown bigger and taller during the time they had not seen each other, while Calix, meanwhile, hid his sword in a holster and said that it was indeed so, and that he had even become healthier, which he had not expected.
And the lady decided to take advantage of the moment, saying that during intense training, one must also eat well, So she showed him her own basket with buns and desserts, hinting at spending the evening together. She said that today was a nice warm day, and therefore suggested that they have a picnic under a large tree, after which they, having already laid out a blanket, sat next to him when the basket was empty, and the Duke put his sword next to it.
The couple sat on the blanket and enjoyed not only the fresh air and warmth, but also the delicious buns, which is why Calix even asked the girl where she could get such delicious food, and Rave replied that this is what they feed her. So it was not difficult for her to take everything and carry it for him. She confessed to the Duke that she had recently become the personal maid of the princesses, and that her life had changed for the better. And the silent Calix only said that he was happy for her, eating bread, while the smiling heroine still said that she was afraid that she would be executed or kicked out of the palace. The protagonist would have continued laughing, telling Calix that he needed to eat a lot in order to build muscle and become stronger. But the guy himself interrupted her with words about how it seemed that the date of departure to war had already been determined, and this made the lady a little nervous and fall silent. With an indignant voice, the girl asked when they wanted to send the boy to war and why so soon, to which Calix, sitting next to him, only answered that the time was already close and there were about a few days left. The heroine felt sad for a moment, realizing that she could suddenly be separated from Calix, who was considered dear to her. But when she realized that it was not the time to be sad, she stood up and surprised the red-eyed guy by saying that they needed to go somewhere, and Calix, of course, clarified where exactly. And the guy was surprised that the young lady looked at him with a smile and admitted that she just wanted to create as many memories with him as possible, good and warm ones, because she was afraid that she might really want this later. After some time, the girl brought Calix to a magical place where there was a lake, illuminated by the moonlight, and thanks to it, carp were visible, which the lady wanted to show the fry, saying that the fish were so beautiful that their scales shine with all the colours of the rainbow. They both sat down on the couch right in front of the water, looked at the fish, and the heroine smiled at Calix, saying that she was incredibly glad that she had come to such a charming place at night, and the guy just looked at the carp and agreed with her. And the heroine was very surprised that the black-haired guy looked at her and admitted that everything was really beautiful. But he said this only when he looked at the girl with a sweet smile, as if seeing in front of her not Calix, but a cat with a dissatisfied face. The girl pointed her finger at him and said that she agreed with his words, and then the red-eyed boy replied that he saw that the lady was definitely pleased with herself, if she said that they needed to come here. But as soon as the girl turned her head to the side, causing her hair to flutter in the wind, and her unnoticeable, healed scar on her forehead became visible, Calix noticed this perfectly, and immediately pounced on the girl, touching her face and asking where she got such a scar, which surprised the lady. The girl stole a story, saying that there was a case when the princess accidentally hit her with a stone, and it was from this blow that the scar remained, which made the guy angry. But when the lady thought about why she did not feel any pain, even in those moments when she fell in the box on the floor and took a blow to the head, she remembered that very butterfly, not understanding whether it was all thanks to her. And what surprised the lady even more was that the guy in front of her continued to look at her with care and concern, saying that he already understood that she must have been in a lot of pain, and he also apologized for noticing her scar only now. The girl realized with excitement that Calix was very close to her again, just like the previous time, and this embarrassed her so much that out of embarrassment she decided to push him away from her, saying that she was fine and that he shouldn't worry. But as soon as she opened her eyes, she realized that she had overdone it in her actions, because she had not simply pushed Calix away, but had thrown him into the shallow water where the silent and surprised guy sat, silent. And she continued to remain silent, even when the girl extended her helping hand to him and said with shame that she was asking for his forgiveness, because she was very worried about being so close to him. But the black-haired guy only looked at his body, being in the water. The heroine herself fell silent when she noticed something strange on Calix's back, which is why she asked the guy with alarm what was on his body, and the red-eyed young man turned to her in surprise when some kind of glow actually appeared on his back. The heroine became even more scared when she noticed a strange colour on the boy's entire back, which looked like blood or some kind of magic at the same time. And the very fact that the lady cannot understand what it is frightens her even more. The guy said that he would tell the girl everything that interested her when he came out of the water. And the first thing he remembered was the terrible moment when his mother was dying in his arms, and he himself showed the terrible and powerful power of a dragon, because she was surrounded by enemies. Red horns appeared above the guy's head, and he looked angrily at the young emperor, who only looked at his relative with a grin, saying that the very power of the dragon that Calix possesses is passed down only from the first emperor and is truly precious. The little boy, with anger, hatred and tears, looked at the emperor and held his dying mother in his arms, wanted to protect her with the power of the Archon and magic, but was too weak, and in the end, he only had to hear the words of the cunning ruler that Saul would never have thought that such magic was hidden in him. There were 2 imperial knights near the emperor, and they were silent when the ruler spoke to the child, holding his mother close, saying that he already understood that he would be of more use than his parents, whom he considered only tools in his hands. And the emperor was already stretching out his hand to the defenseless boy, wanting to take advantage of him, saying that if he did not know how to use his magic, he would use it as easily as he would kill his mother right now. Now the boy said that this is why a seal was placed on his body that suppressed the power of the dragon. After that, he spent 5 years in the old castle and recently moved to the palace, and the girl in the meantime hung the boy's shirt on a stick to dry it with a fire. Gawaril and Calix dried his hair with a towel. She immediately imagined in her head a beautiful and large dragon with thick scales, realizing that the power of the dragon is not just magic, but a kind of gift that is passed on to all heirs along the imperial line, and is powerful. The lady imagined the emperor with a large crown and in red robes, realizing that this power was so powerful that all the women in the empire instantly saw the emperor as a favorite, who for them seemed to be the ideal man and desired by everyone. The little girl looked a little sad, looking away, thinking that this power, like temptation, ended up being a real nightmare for Calix, the reason why his whole life became more difficult. Therefore, in order to support the upset and silent boy, she decided to approach him and thus made the red-eyed duke turn around, because the lady said that he really was an incredibly strong guy, even if he was very young. The lady decided to take care of Calix and adjusted the towel on his shoulders. When he looked at her in surprise, he heard from the little girl that he was strong, and not only due to the power of the dragon, but also in spirit, because he was still a great enemy of the emperor, and that the current ruler was afraid of him. Calix said that it was a long time ago, and he had already experienced it. But the pink-haired All-Avon took his hand in her hands and put it to her face, saying that she already understood that he had experienced real pain, suffering, and that this made her sad, as if she was experiencing it with him. At that moment, Calix realized that he had gone through all the suffering in order to now be with the main character, and enjoy, it would seem, her voice, words, and support. So he hugged Rave and said with a smile that everything was fine now, and that it was the past that had only made him stronger. But the guy also became more serious, realizing that this is not only joy, but also responsibility, because now he wants the girl to always be able to rely on him and hug him with care always, which means he needs to become several times stronger. He needs to find a path that he can follow. He already knew that the main enemy in his life was the emperor, whom he imagined sitting on a throne with a big crown, because it was such a majestic and cruel man like him who destroyed his life, which meant that he had to take revenge and make Rave happy with his death. Calix promised that the good time for the emperor would end, and after that they decided to return, holding hands and saying that they already needed to go home, because it was already dark. Deep night had come. So the boys spent the evening, after which a beautiful morning quickly arrived, and above the luxurious imperial palace there was a deep sky with large clouds. And in the castle itself, interesting events were already taking place. The thing is that the heroine was already working as a maid, being in a room with several maids who were talking about a certain Lyra and that she had good taste and cleaned well. And they also asked the little girl if she had watered the flowers and checked the flower beds. And when the heroine was happily cleaning up, one maid walked past her and said with embarrassment that she wanted to apologize to her for the fact that she had behaved rudely towards her earlier, and Ray happily replied that there was nothing wrong with that. Many of the maids in the room looked at the girl when she was sitting down, as if she still remembered how they treated her to delicious fruits, and the ladies said that the maid Lyra was really kind and charming. Noticing that everyone did not stop praising her for literally every action, because in the eyes of others, she became the kindest and most wonderful person, the lady decided to run away, embarrassedly trying not to listen to compliments and praise addressed to her anymore. After some time, the heroine moved to another room, because she could not be there where they constantly praised her and did not stop doing so. So she smiled and straightened the curtains in the apartment when Raniella was behind her. The pink-haired lady was calmly and curiously attaching the fasteners to the curtains and thinking that she already believed that no one would offend her or harm her here, because with each passing day, everyone around her treated her only better. The girl even remembered that everyone around her began to notice not only her efforts, but also her thin lips, hair, eyes, hands, and other little things. But all her thoughts were interrupted when she heard another voice, and from that she looked away. The thing is, there was a princess in the office, sitting at her desk and talking, it seemed privately, about how she was already tired of talking about the weather. And Rave, looking at her, realized that they were meeting for the first time since she became a maid. Therefore the shy lady decided to approach the princess and ask what she was thinking about now, and the lady looked at her with surprise, holding a pen in her hands, getting ready to tell Rhea something. They both looked at several blank papers, as well as crumpled pieces of paper, because Princess Elle told her friend that she really wanted to write a letter. But she didn't know what to write about, since she hadn't spoken to this person for a long time, and she was interested in how he was doing. The pink-haired lady did not ask who exactly the lady was writing to, but with a smile advised her to write sincere questions in the letter. For example, how he was doing, and whether he was healthy in general. But the princess sitting at the table replied that it was too awkward. But when the protagonist finally asked the princess if she was writing a letter to some boy, Rave realized that it seemed that Ella was writing a letter to the main character of the novel, because she actually answered that this was the case, remembering that the princess is now 7 years old and that she just started dating a gallows heroine named Roy, and the princess also told her that if she is embarrassed to write directly, she can write with a hint. And when the girl was telling this to Elle, gesturing with her hand, a smiling Raniel entered the room. The princess quickly understood what to write thanks to the help of the main character. So she asked Raniel to bring her new paper for writing, and the maid answered with a smile that she would now fulfill the lady's request. Rave was glad that the princess's mood had improved and she had managed to motivate her, and Raniel had already approached them and put a new paper on the table, for which Elle thanked her. And the girl also leaned towards the pink-haired baby in a whisper and said with a smile that now they needed to move away so that the princess could concentrate on the letter, and Rave looked at her with understanding. But even when it seemed possible to talk about the princess and her studies, the maid spoke only about Rave, taking her out of the office again with praises saying that she was only getting better every day, which the protagonist was happy about. And the golden-haired lady looked at this because this touched her. The red-eyed lady was unable to fully immerse herself in writing the letter, because once again she noticed perfectly well that everyone was again paying attention only to Rave, and Elle, holding the papers in her hands, was sad again. Because of the injustice in her soul, indignation, and pasali, the girl squeezed the paper and crumpled it, wondering what was so special about Rave that everyone stopped paying attention to the princess and only praised the maid and smiled at her all day. Looking at the table, on which there were already several lumps of spoiled letters, the princess became even sadder, being left alone and realizing that Rave was being praised poorly when she was simply doing her job, and in fact, Elle was even seriously thinking about Rave disappearing somewhere as soon as possible. The girl realized that from the moment she started thinking about it, she could only dream that Rave could just disappear, and then everything would be like before, and the lady leaned back in her chair, telling herself that she was disgusting if she thought so. The princess also remembered the moment when she had recently been rude to Rave for no reason, and she was very ashamed of it. And when she got up from her desk, she realized that she had given her friend such work, and therefore knew that she was taking responsibility for it. And taking a vase with beautiful purple flowers in her hands, the lady resolutely looked ahead and realized that she immediately needed to go and apologize to Rave for her behavior, and she decided to present the bouquet with the vase as a gift. As the lady was already walking down the hallway to find Rave and ask her for forgiveness, she looked out from around the corner and saw a pink-haired lady who was being told by several maids that she was not the only one who was so worried about something. At first, the princess decided to hide and eavesdrop on what Rave and the others were talking about, and heard that they were telling the little girl that everyone learns from their mistakes, and the pink-haired lady was saying that she was afraid that the princess would be uncomfortable around her because of her incompetence. But the big shock for the princess was that Rave was praised again, for the umpteenth time that day, even putting her hand on the top of her head and saying that even though she was small, she could learn a lot from her. Then a real shock came for Elle. She began to shake, and her hands weakened, trembled when she held the vase in her hands, and did not understand why the maids now considered a rebel and an orphan to be an authority, and not the emperor's princess. When she couldn't contain her anger, indignation, and hatred, she suddenly lifted up a large vase of flowers and was about to throw it on the floor with all her might, because in her head there was only one question. Why in her own house everyone was talking about Rave, but not about her? There was a loud crash, as if something had actually broken into small pieces, and all the maids who were near Rave turned around at the noise, amazed at what was happening, just like the heroine. They immediately ran in the direction of the noise, and saw the little princess, not understanding what happened and whether she was hurt, while the other maid looked in shock at the result of the blow in the form of a broken vase with flowers on the floor. And when the maids began to ask the princess incessantly whether she was hurt and what she wanted to do, the frightened and saddened Elle realized that she had just broken the vase, only to get attention.
She quickly shouted to everyone that she was just tired, then ran to the side, while the maid behind her was surprised and asked the little girl what happened, saying that she needed to check her hands for wounds.